All right, everybody, welcome to Vitals and Virtues. I am your same host, Leo Barber, and here today, my buddy, Jared Ray Prophet, the man, the myth, the legend. Basically, every time somebody comes on here, I say that. So you're not the only man, myth, or legend, but you're the only Jared Ray Prophet that I know. So unless you're
many other Jared Ray Prophets out there.
Yeah, we are sitting down. We didn't do an ice bath or set of vital signs today because just because I didn't feel like it. But what we do have, which is pretty cool, is something called a short stack Imperial Brown Ale from Virginia Beer. I don't know who Virginia Beer is. The Virginia Beer Company. See if I can get a good crack. Nope, not at all. Anyways, Jared and I are going to sit down, drink a beer, and talk about, why Vladimir Putin is whatever he is. I don't know. Just kidding. I've heard Prophet's thoughts on this a lot, and we're like, you know what would be entertaining? To talk about this on not air, because this isn't exactly air. But anyways, there's a whole lot. So, Jared, tell us a little about yourself. Why are you an expert on Russia?
I'm not an expert on Russia. But me and you were talking the other night, and we had a pretty insightful conversation that, after we got done talking about it, you were saying about your podcast. I was like, yeah, that'd be a good idea something to talk about, so.
Yeah, so.
But I do know, I have been to Russia. I've been to Russia 3 or 4 times. That doesn't make me credible on their politics, but I have been there.
Yeah.
Been to Moscow, St. Petersburg, been to the art museum there in St. Petersburg. Saw a lot of Ivan Ivasovsky, I think that's how you say it, paintings. He's the guy that's most famous for painting pictures of the sea. So a lot of paintings you see of the ocean, a lot of them are from him.
Interesting. Well, before we get too far into this, cheers, my good man, et multos benianos. Vitam aeternum. I just made that Latin phrase up. I think it means to many good years and eternal life, but
that's a good thing to.
I could be very wrong too. Could be very wrong. I'm no Latin scholar.
Could be to something not good.
Well, yeah, you could be. That is a delightful beer.
Yeah, man, brown beer, brown ales, man.
Yeah, it is 8% ABV, so we'll probably have to drink this slow.
I'll have to get a designated driver.
Get an Uber home.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, let's go back before we get into the whole Russia stuff. So how
we met?
Yeah, let's go with your impression. How this went, boot camp and all this.
So I've been friends with you since we met in 2011. Yeah. We were going to boot camp out of Fort Lee in Petersburg, Virginia. And because it was January, the weather shut down the roads, and every day we just go back to the hotel and have to wait and find out if we were actually going. And that went on for like 3 days. But yeah, I remember somebody was behind us in one of the rec rooms at Fort Lee playing cards, and I heard somebody quoting a line from the movie Tombstone, where Billy Bob Thornton is yelling at the fellow people in the saloon about playing cards with his brother's kids, and I was like turned around and I was like, who said that? And that was you.
It was me.
Yep. And we
you were like skin that smoke wagon and see what happened.
I think I followed up with another line from the movie, and we kind of started being friendly with each other, and throughout.
Don't word it that way. Don't.
Well.
At least we weren't in the Navy, and that's not like
no. No, yeah. I mean, when you're going in the Marines, you gotta, you're getting thrown in with a bunch of random people, so it's kind of good to find people to be friends with. So.
Yeah, it was probably pretty beneficial that we got delayed. 3 days at Fort Lee?
3 days, yeah.
Yeah, because the bridges had iced over on the way into Parris Island.
Yeah.
So man, what a time!
What a time! Yep.
What was your favorite boot camp memory?
I don't know about
graduation day.
Boot camp memories. Yeah, graduation day was actually when you go through. It's kind of like if you allow yourself to starve, or you do your you do your what do you call it, your fasting. I mean, I guess when you're first able to eat again, that's a pretty refreshing feeling. But
I don't know, man. That Warriors breakfast thing on the Saturday when you finish up the Crucible, for the Crucible, were we in the same group? I don't think we were. Anyways, for anybody that doesn't know, the Crucible is like the last training evolution that you have in Parris Island or Marine Corps Recruiting Depot, San Diego. Like, it's just a pretty grueling, it's a 54-hour event or something. You cover like close to 50 miles in a...
It's about 2.5 days.
Yeah.
Yep.
So I remember, they're like, all right, you're getting, I remember, was it, Bradner?
Oh, God.
Senior drill instructor, Staff Sergeant Davis was like, so this is what's going to be, how he kind of lays it out like very vaguely. You guys are shipping, tomorrow at whatever time we decide, and you get a piece of fruit and like
Apple. You got an apple.
Yeah.
Yep.
And you, and then we're humping out, hiking to wherever we're going. I think it was like the old, well, I don't want to spoil it too much, but I just remember Bradner like asking asking any question in boot camp was such a process, and like was a very high likelihood that you were about to get smoked and like hazed for like 30 minutes for a dumb question or even a good question. But Bradner's like, you mean a box chow? It's like, no, piece of fruit, a daggone piece of fruit.
Yeah, I remember that. Yeah.
Core memory right there.
Staff Sergeant Davis, man.
That dude was...
That was a hardcore dude.
He was scary.
I couldn't understand what he was saying half the time. That was a big challenge for me. I think that was a big challenge for most people. But yeah, that was...
I think...
You remember when he always say, doing the drill thing, he'd say, open the Coke?
Open the Coke?
Yeah, and I remember that was one time, he kept trying to get me to like position my thumb a certain way on the rifle button. He kept going to me, he's like, Prophet, open the Coke. And I was like, I don't really know what that means.
Wait, open the Coke?
Open the Coke.
I thought he was saying open the coat. Like, open up your coat. Like,
yeah, well, maybe he was.
Like you're
I don't
selling
know.
watches
maybe
or
that's
something.
what he was saying. I don't know. But he kept saying, open the coat. And I was like, I don't know what that means. And he kept like yelling right in my face, open the coat, mother effer. I was like, okay.
Yeah, good times. Yeah, that was like such a scary time. Who was the scariest drill instructor for you?
Davis.
Was it?
Oh, yeah.
Somehow he didn't.
I didn't
scare
care
me.
about Sullivan or Hortrick or Lanier. Yeah, I mean they were the bigger pains in the neck, but I wasn't afraid of. I was afraid of Davis.
I think you're afraid of all of them. Like,
I wasn't really afraid of them. I mean, obviously, you didn't want to get on their bad side. Yeah, but I was legitimately afraid of Davis.
Bring that mic a little bit closer. Yeah, make out with it. Just kidding. I have other guests. I don't want them to.
I got you.
Yeah. So, Staff Sergeant Davis, Staff Sergeant Sullivan saved my life once. You remember when everybody was just sick as snot, like real bad. You ended up getting sick, like.
Oh, when the whole platoon got sick from food poisoning?
It was the whole company. Like,
yeah.
You guys were like.
It was bad eggs.
It was so bad. Like, I remember Firewatch during that week was like, oh, everybody's having to do Firewatch because there's so few people.
Yeah, I remember that, yeah.
I didn't get it somehow or another, but they were making us eat with forks and just forks. You couldn't touch any of your food. And then everybody starts like coughing up blood at some point, and I'm like, man, we got like tuberculosis or something. I was like, Doc Holliday. Yeah. Well, so I don't remember. It might have been like training day 17. Like your senior drill instructors.
It was second phase. I remember because Sullivan was trying to tell me that when I went into the sick bay. Of course, they're always trying to, they're just trying to get under you, it's a mental game. And I just remembered it was second phase because that's when rifle call is, and he was saying, "You're gonna miss rifle call. You're gonna miss rifle call.
You're gonna get dropped.
You're gonna get dropped. You're gonna get dropped."
Yeah, there was something else then, because it was I can't remember what it is at this point, but I just remember we were all getting smoked real bad, and the drill instructor just constantly spitting on your faces, and I was tired of it. And I knew who the main culprit was, and who it was Hortrick for me.
Oh,
he and I knew he was sick, and he kept spitting on people, And it's not like they're hawking loogies intentionally to spit in your eye. I don't think it could happen.
Yeah.
I could definitely imagine it being true that being true, but this was like, you know what? I'm gonna get back at these sons of So I just sat there like I was not responding for a significant amount of time. And Sergeant Hortrick noticed. I don't remember who was to my right, but because everything was confused for whatever reason. I think a lot of people must have been out quarantined, but I had the biggest mouthful of spit. And I looked at Sergeant Hortrick when he got right in my face, and the spit like splattered on me. And I screamed back the loudest, most aggressive "I, sir" that ever was, with a mouth just like full of spit.
Oh man!
And and Staff Sergeant Sullivan had to pull him off me. Immediately as I finished saying it and it hit him, like I was on the ground. Sergeant Hortrick was on top of me, and it was a bad day for me.
Yeah, I guess I wasn't there for that one.
Yeah, it was terrible.
That was when we were
It was
sick.
scary. It was very
And
scary.
you weren't. Oh man, yeah, that is. Yeah, that's man.
Yeah, it was a rough time.
Yeah, I've when people talk to me that haven't been in the military or especially the Marines, I definitely try to emphasize, at least from my experience, the drill instructors are kind of a different breed of people for the most part.
I don't like they was it. One of them was telling us maybe at the end. You know, when you actually get time after crucibles and they talk a little bit, it's like they lose like 30 pounds a cycle.
Yeah, they.
I don't know how they have the energy.
Tough guys, yeah.
Yeah, they're savages. Thank goodness for those guys.
Yeah, but now, yeah, me and you helped each other out in boot camp, and definitely, talking to each other, praying, and keeping our spirits up, and that's how me and you did pretty well physically.
Yeah.
Yeah,
you lost a good bit of weight in boot camp,
lost
but
a
it wasn't
lot of
like
weight,
you were
yeah.
fat.
I wasn't fat. I just lost. It's this the type of diet you had. But yeah, no, I went in. I was pretty strong. I went in 165 and came out 142.
Dang.
Yeah, I lost a lot of weight.
Yeah, I was I think I pretty much stayed the same. I think I was like 135 and came out at like 137. I wasn't like Fish who was getting fed because he was house mouse, but yeah, that was good old times, man. So you don't have any better stories?
Oh man, boot camp's been a while, man.
It has been.
And I did quite a bit, after that, for over 5 years after that.
Yeah, what all did you get to do? Didn't you go to Morocco or something?
Yeah, I went to Africa for just some training. Nothing, and no combat. We were supposed to go to Afghanistan in 2014, and we were a month away from actually leaving. But for some reason in my mind, I was just like, I don't feel like we're going to go,
Yeah.
But this was back when Obama was...
The basically draw down from a lot of stuff.
Well, they were trying to draw down, but there was some weird politics stuff going on. But my unit was a combat engineer unit, and they were on rotation. They'd been on rotation for 10 years. Well, for 9 years. I got into the unit in 2011, and we had a unit. We were rotating platoons out, one at a time, never the whole company. And there were 3 combat engineer platoons and 1 support platoon, and the combat engineer platoons were rotating out every other year. So when I got in, there was a platoon in Afghanistan, and they got back. So 2012, we were training, and they were like, all right, so just get ready to go in 2013. And I was just assuming I was going in 2013, but that didn't happen. So 2014, we got an official orders to go, and we were a month out, and they canceled it.
Yeah.
And then I was until 2016 and just never got deployed, but did go to some interesting places. Went to California, Michigan, a few other places in the U.S., and got to go to Africa for a few weeks for some training, joint training with the Moroccan military and counter IED training.
Nice.
Got to experience a little bit of culture over there and see some interesting people.
Can you say that without sounding so racist?
Well, no, they were. A lot of people don't realize, which I didn't either until we went over there. Morocco was the United States' oldest ally.
Is it?
Yeah, they were our first ally after we became a nation, or after we declared ourselves independent from
It wasn't
England.
France?
Morocco dedicated their support to us as
so
our ally,
weird.
even before France. They were our first ally.
To me, it seems kind of like, there's this hound dog of the U.S. is like, oh, we're gonna be our own people, and then this like little teacup dog.
Well, they were probably more at that time. They were probably more of a significant military power than
Were
we
they?
were. Yeah.
Well,
I mean, when we started, we weren't nothing.
We were just a militia, I
Yeah,
guess. But but Morocco, like I just think it's like a speck on the like it's probably the size of Virginia or smaller. Is it?
Something like that. Yeah.
I have no idea. I'm just throwing.
No, it's not a very
things
big
out.
country, but they were the United States' first ally.
Dang, that is interesting.
Mm-hmm. So we've had good relations with them for a long time, and that's
Yeah.
part of why we do stuff like we were doing, joint military training operations, and
Blowing stuff up.
they were fighting ISIS, and we were trying to, just train with them to show them stuff we knew, but they really knew more than we did because they've been doing it for a long time.
Yeah.
Yeah, so they were showing us stuff. We had better equipment, but they had more experience.
Yeah. Wow.
We were showing them how to use our very sophisticated mine detectors, and they were showing us like
You go out there with a
basically
shovel.
from their experience how to, like how to think, how to think like you're a person that's actually trying to emplace the bombs, and so you could be better at finding them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, there was a thing, I don't remember what I saw, where I saw it, but it was like this guy, all this training to like uncover IEDs and like sophisticated equipment, and then it just shows this other dude that's just walking out there like in flip-flops and he has like a pickaxe, and he just like hammers down the pickaxe on this speck of dust and yanks it up, and it flips out a what do you call is it like a frying pan? There was like a kitchen utensil type name.
Like
pressure
a pressure plate?
That's
Yeah,
it.
yeah.
A new plate. I knew it was something.
That's actually how that was an actual like an actual textbook method of looking or clearing an IED that we trained on. They gave us like a sickle. You would, like an old-fashioned, like Grim Reaper type tool, and you would literally throw it out in front of you and slide it through the dirt to pull a tripwire or something like that, or to find the pressure plate.
Dang.
Yeah.
That's wild.
Thank God I didn't have to do that. But I had friends that were combat engineers in the Army, and from talking to them, most of their so when we were going to be deployed, it was going to work out so a combat engineer from each squad was going to be tasked to one combat engineer for each infantry squad to be out in front on patrol.
Essentially, you were the
looking
guy
for
that
the bomb.
that drew the short
But
straw.
we were dismounted on foot. In the Army, from most of their experience, they were doing, so it's called route clearance. And the combat engineers in the Army seemed like most of the ones I talked to, they were mounted. So they were in vehicles designed to take explosion.
Yeah.
So I was like, man, that sounds a lot better than being on foot.
Yeah.
Because in my unit, several guys did get killed and get their legs blown off and stuff like that. So.
Yeah. I mean, it takes you back to like the Gulf War, kind of like just out there, the kid walking up front.
Well, I mean, yeah, they were, that IED, the way the people over there were fighting with IED seemed to evolve a lot in the most recent Afghan, Iraq wars, because they couldn't fight conventional, so that was kind of how they developed their that was their most effective way to fight the United States, was to just plant bombs and wait for you to walk over them or try to detonate them with a cell phone or something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's what, like, so we're just gonna go for it. Like, so whenever people tell you like, oh well, the Second Amendment, like, you really think you could stand up to the United States military? Like your Second Amendment rights, you having an AR is really gonna prevent you or keep you from falling under the thumb of our government or something like that. Like, well, yeah, it worked. It kind of worked. Well, Vietnam's a different deal, but definitely worked in Iraq and Afghanistan. Like, those people were running around with AKs and IEDs, and they were able to prolong a war for 20 plus years, and still kind of won, in a way.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. Yeah.
So your homeboy with his, M4 style rifle at home is probably not as far off being able to, and it's not like, oh, you're not going to try to mount some assault against the government.
People look at that aspect, real simple-minded. I mean, they don't put any thought into it when they say stuff like that. But it's if you have an armed populace versus an unarmed populace, the armed populace is going to be a deterrent. So basically, if the government's going to enforce tyrannical laws, they realize that if people have guns, They're going to resist, and it's not that the power of the military couldn't overwhelm those people, but in order to do that, they're going to have to kill them, and they want to rule you. And if you're all dead, they're not really ruling you. So that's a big part of it.
You know what's interesting about that is like this is the way a virus works on people as well. Like this is the reason why anytime you have a virus that hits, say, something like COVID, you know, it needs to have a host in order to survive. So most diseases find some happy medium where they make you feel like trash, but they don't kill you until they reach whatever their, like, I use a big word, teleological end is. Just kidding. I don't think that necessarily applies. Like essentially to the end to which they were made. Like the virus wants to have a host. So the government is a virus.
Well, yeah.
All right, let's just roll into Russia here. So if Russia's idea isn't necessarily to move in, occupy, and like change people, they just want scorched earth, then they can move in and repopulate. Am I wrong about that?
In Ukraine?
Yeah.
Well, the reason they're having to do that is because Ukraine's fighting. If Ukraine didn't have weapons, yeah, they could not have to do that. Kind of like what I was saying, you know.
Yeah.
If you have an unarmed populace, you can enforce tyrannical law, and they won't like it. They'll be pissed off. They would like to, but they can't really fight you. So you can just tell them what to do, you know.
Yeah.
But if they have weapons, they can at least fight, and they will fight. And
Yeah.
and then they will hurt you, and you'll hurt them. And if you've got a real powerful government, you'll eventually win. But you'll have had to lose a lot of your people, plus you'll have to kill a lot of the. So it's a deterrent, you know. That's So you know that's why when people argue about the Second Amendment and people having a shoulder-fired weapon, you know, they're like, are you going to be able to take on the government with jets and tanks and stuff like that? It's like, well, if everybody's got guns, then they're not. It's not like, you know, it's more complex than that. You know?
Yeah. So speaking of, let's. You are the one that turned me onto this. The Battle of Athens.
Yeah.
Give us a history lesson on the Battle of Athens.
Well, I haven't read that story in a while, but I remember it was pretty interesting to me. I got turned on to it when I was taking a Constitution class at Liberty, and it's a short video that they made. It's like a little movie you can watch on YouTube, but it's a true event. I believe it happened in 1946 in a small town. I think it was in Tennessee, where
I assume Athens, Tennessee.
It was a sheriff that had basically, it was a corrupt sheriff, and he had his own deputies, and they were basically imposing their will on the populace there, you know, basically, you know, just doing whatever they wanted. And I guess it would be like a miniature version of a federal government gone awry. But back in those days, it's not like today where somebody's mistreating you, police brutality, or the police are stealing from you. They go to your house and take your stuff. You know, it's not like you can get on social media. You can't, you know, immediately report it to the press, especially when you're out in a small town like that. But anyway, so a lot of these World War II veterans, when they returned home, they didn't like what was going on, and the police were, they were really, like I said, I can't remember all the details of it, but they were. It was like what you would imagine in a tyrannical government situation, and the veterans broke into an armory and took a bunch of M1s and, like, you know, World War II weapons of the time, and actually surrounded like the police station or where the police were and kept them at bay. They had like a little battle and kept them there until the federal government, they had called the FBI to come in and help them.
Yeah.
And I believe it was the FBI. It was a higher form of law enforcement to come in, because the police department was completely corrupt. They were stealing, they were beating people up. They were just basically, you know, they were abusing their power. Mm-hmm. And the veterans, they did. I don't think they actually killed anybody, but they returned all the weapons and, you know, basically did everything by the book as far as their own, you know, as far as like rights as we understand them. They didn't. Yeah. They were basically practicing self-defense, and none of them were ever prosecuted, and they ended up, the sheriff and all of his deputies were prosecuted and removed from power, and that was an example of where guns in the hands of civilians actually helped them overturn a situation where they may have not been able to do so. You know?
Yeah. It's just such a like great story to me because like in my head, like I have a very vivid imagination. Did you ever see the movie? I think Walking Tall was the name of it.
Yeah, with Dwayne Johnson.
Well, there was an older one
version,
too. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it's like basically that happened.
Yeah. Yeah.
But like the original
And that's a
version
true
of that.
story.
Yeah, both of them are true.
Yeah.
But I think it's just funny, like how these vets, like imagine coming home after storming the beaches of Normandy or the island
they've been
hopping
all fighting
campaign.
for their country, and they come home and their own police are like harassing them and terrorizing them.
Yeah, they're like, hey, fellas,
Yeah.
come on, boys, let's go down to the armory and take care of this.
Yeah, trying to do that to some guys that just came back from World War II is probably not the best move on the police department.
No, like the I don't know stupidity of those in that sheriff's office. Gosh, what a terrible idea.
Yeah, yeah.
But yeah, so why might you be an interesting person to talk to about Russia?
Russia. Well, I liked in the Facebook post you made the other day about me doing this podcast with you. You put in my description historian, a Marine, and a geopolitical
Analyst, that's right.
Analyst. Yeah.
I mean, I didn't look amateur, sure, but
No, you put me on there as
I
a
didn't
global strategist.
global strategy.
That's what you put me on there, a global strategist. Yeah, yeah. And so
Hey man, got to get some clickbait somehow.
Yeah. Well, no, a global strategist. I actually liked that. I was like, that's interesting.
I mean,
I've never thought of that, but so my framework and understanding of how basically the reality we live in, the way the world operates, and our position in the world is a lot of it's how I'm raised, but also just by understanding of history.
Yeah.
And of the 20th century and all of the events that have led up to where we are right now in the year 2025. And I think that naturally...
Tilt this mic up like that.
I think that naturally... I think that naturally, especially, being that it is my own country, anybody that's a patriot wants their country to do well and be powerful and prosperous. And
doesn't that just make you a white nationalist?
Well, there's a difference between patriotism and nationalism. I like to be a patriot,
I gotcha.
And
semantics, man.
They're a little different.
Here soon, I'm just gonna start laying into you the biggest devil's advocate.
But anyway, so yeah, like I was saying though, the United States ever since World War II has been the world leader.
The world police force?
Well, people say that sometimes, but we are the leader of the free world. After we defeated the Nazis in Europe and we defeated the Empire of Japan in 1945, we had to do a lot to do that. I mean, 500,000 Americans were killed in action to accomplish that, along with millions and millions of other people in the world. So after that happened, our biggest part of that is, well, how do we prevent that from happening again?
Yeah.
Well, after World War II, us, the United States, and the Soviet Union were the two big dogs on the block. We never really had a hot war, but the Cold War, which basically began almost immediately after the end of World War II and lasted until 1991, that was basically the two big, in my understanding, good and evil, but communist and the free world jockeying for position.
Yeah.
Because somebody, just like in a schoolyard, some people, they like to think of world affairs as being, more sophisticated or more complex, but it's not really. It's people. People are the same, but it's basically schoolyard rules, and the United States is now the leader of the free world after the Soviet Union collapsed. Somebody's got to be the top dog that runs things, because if there's not somebody there, somebody's going to be there. Now, who it is, it's up to somebody. So somebody's going to want to be in that position. We are the only country in the world we are the world's reserve currency.
Yeah.
So that is people don't realize how important that is, but we have that right because of our military supremacy.
Yeah.
Basically, people would, they'll say other reasons, but that's basically what it boils down to. So there's a reason that we need to maintain that, because if we don't, somebody, well, why should, who are we to be in that position? Well, I can understand, it sounds arrogant or prideful, but if we're not in that position, then somebody else is in that position.
Yeah, well, I mean, so flip back to like the war on terror, the war in the Middle East. You had Saddam Hussein. So once they dug him up out of his hole and essentially like removed him from power, which is hilarious that somehow he was in power from his pit. Obviously, there's a lot to that, but once he was routed and we tried to essentially like a weird way colonize this region, it didn't work. Like we just created a vacuum, and who was going to fill that vacuum because we weren't going to step in and colonize it. Right.
You're talking about in Iraq.
Yeah.
So I think the idea with Iraq was kind of similar to like our understanding of how, of what we did with Germany and Japan after World War II. We defeated their militaries. We did not allow them to rebuild their militaries. We said you can rebuild up a force to maintain your own country, but with that, we understand that you have to have protection. We will be your protector, but you can't have your own military. You've lost that right.
Yeah.
But we will take care of any military issues that you have. With that, Japan and Germany are the third and fourth largest economies in the world. They're great,
because they haven't had to worry about building up a
they're
military.
great civilizations, and they have like the American aura hanging over them. Like free market, Western ideas. Of course, Germany's kind of a Western civilization anyway, but Japan's not. But now they are. Japan is kind of a Western civilization, in essence.
The far west.
But so that was kind of the idea with Iraq. They were like, we did that with Germany and Japan. They're our ally. Germany and Japan are friendly with us now. They have to be.
Yeah.
So whether they like us or not, it doesn't matter because they don't have a military.
Yeah.
So it doesn't matter what we do. They have to do what we say. And that's fine with us because, basically.
I do have some listeners from Germany, so I apologize.
Now, yeah. But so the idea was kind of similar to that. We defeat the Iraqi military. We develop a peaceful society there. We get rid of all the bad actors, let them build up their economy into a capitalistic, democratic type style civilization.
Ooh,
and with that,
democratic. We're about
okay. Well, with that, they have a Western culture, and with that, it will just naturally be a more peaceful place. It'll be a better place. They'll be our allies, kind of like Germany and Japan. Well, but like you said, that's not how it worked out. But that was the idea.
Gotcha. I feel like for at least in the Middle East, we didn't have the fortitude in that environment to go as far as was necessary because we had so many. I think part of it is the news media's involvement. I mean, this is classic for like Vietnam. Like we won that war, but we lost it because we lost it on the media. Would you agree with that?
Yeah. The support. You can't win a war if you don't have any support.
Because people want to like push their own agendas, and whether you agree with the president or whatever your governing body is or not, there doesn't seem to be a whole lot of support for your own nation anymore. You're just like, oh, we're just as crappy as everyone else. Why should we shove our nose into things? It's like, well, because atrocities are happening and somebody shouldn't get involved, and it doesn't seem like those who are in closest proximity are doing something about this, which you could argue. I mean, you could argue this till you're blue in the face. Some people are just not going to like the idea, and I don't really.
Are you talking about Vietnam?
Kind of. I mean, even that, and then.
Well, Vietnam. So
I'm just letting everybody know how much I don't know.
Now, let's throw all the situations in there. So since World War II, you got Korea, which that wasn't. Why were we in Korea?
Was Korea French Indochina or something at the time, or was that Vietnam?
Vietnam.
Okay.
But so why were we in Korea? Why were we in Vietnam? Why did we go to Iraq and Afghanistan? Why are we giving financial support to Ukraine? So if
we dumped as much money into the United States as we have in say North Carolina, because North Carolina is still hurting from the stuff that happened. Whether you would ascribe to the ideas that the government and the BlackRock organizations have cloud seeded and washed away mountains and all of that stuff or not, those people are still hurting.
I'm very familiar with that situation because of friends of mine that have been directly on the ground helping out with some of that stuff.
Which we could talk about that too, because I know some people are interested in helping out the folks in North Carolina and just need to get in touch with the right contacts. But
a good friend of mine was actually down there in some kind of way. He got hooked up. He was like, from what he was telling me, he said the controller for like all of the helicopter operations down there for several weeks, and was actually in like the command tent. Like he was like part of the command.
He was sending Elon Musk's drones
Well, he was
away?
there when Elon Musk and Trump were there on the conference calls,
Oh,
directing
dang.
them and stuff. Yeah, it was pretty neat. But yeah, no. So, but yeah, like you were saying though, we're sending money there, but we don't have enough money for our own people, things like that. Yeah, that's bad mismanagement. There's no reason for that. That's ridiculous. But the
$300 billion to Ukraine, but
something crazy like that. Yeah, but hey, 50 years ago, like in Korea and Vietnam, we would have done a lot more than just send money over there. We'd have already troops over there. You know, so. But anyway, the point is that there's reasons for that. It's not just because I understand that there's a lot of people on different they have different political ideology on the left and right, and they have their own thoughts about why we get involved in certain things, and some of them might be right, some of them might be wrong, but. If you do something, you have multiple motivations. Normally when you do something, it's not just a singular motivation of like, well, the military-industrial complex or there's corrupt politicians. All of that's true, but there's also a underlying foundational reason of why we even think about doing that or can justify it, and that is because we, like I said, after World War II, we are the superpower in the world to try to control, because we took lessons from World War II. Okay, Hitler in the 1930s annexed Austria, and similar, and then like compare that to the Crimea with Russia, annexed Austria, and we were like, okay, that's not cool, but if they want it, let them do it. They voted, let them do it. And then he took over, I think it was Hungary. It was another one of those.
Sounds about right.
One of those countries right there near Germany, and they were like, well, that's a little much. You're going a little bit farther now. And Hitler was like, all right, that's all we want. He's like, they're really kind of like, it's very similar like Russia talking about the Ukrainians really being Russian people. He's like, but these are really German people anyway. Yeah. Because Hitler wasn't born in Germany. He was born in Austria. Yeah. And, but anyway, so he's like, but these are really.
What is annexing? Like, what does that mean?
Basically, you kind of, you take whole other country really, or part of another country, and you kind of co-opt them into joining your country.
Oh, so they're like Austria,
they voluntarily joined, but
Austria,
not really.
You're Germany now.
Yeah,
that's what he said.
Well, they had elections, and a lot of the people wanted to do that, but it wasn't. The government of Austria didn't elect for that to even happen.
Yeah,
it'd be like if North Carolina said we're going to have elections to join Canada. And we're like, well, and enough North Carolinians just actually voted to join Canada, and then Canada's like, yeah, come on. And we're like, well, wait a minute, we didn't say you should do that, but but they did it anyway. Yeah, or a better example would be Maine, because Maine's actually bordering Canada, and so now Maine is a part of Canada. Yeah. So it's kind of like that.
Sorry, all you can, so Maine dwelling folk and North Carolinians who now are, according to Prophet.
But yeah, anyway, so you got that, and then I think back then it was the League of Nations, that were like, you can't be doing that, but they kept pushing the envelope, and then Hitler was like, well, that's all I want to do. Promise won't do no more.
As he was like,
they kept letting him do it, and I can't remember who the Prime Minister of England was back then. I think it was Chamberlain. Was it Neville Chamberlain? I think.
It sounds familiar, but
anyway,
you would know better than me, Mr.
It was a
Historian.
Chamberlain, somebody. I can't remember his first name. But anyway, he was the one over there negotiating with him, and I remember it's real famous. He comes back to England and he's waving it in front of the cameras and everything. He's got a written letter from Hitler promising peace. He's like waving it as like a trophy. Like, look what I did. We don't got to worry about another world war. They've come to the table in agreement. This is all they're going to do. And it was literally like a month later they invade Poland, and then World War II breaks out. Yeah. So, it's you give an inch, and you've got people out there that are hungry, and especially when they actually publicly espouse their ambitions, kind of like Putin. We learned that you don't want to just let them steamroll other countries.
Yeah, well, you also don't want to like ignore them. Like you and I were talking the other night. The guy who was deemed the unkillable soldier, he was a British fella who had enlisted to piss his dad off, and then after he had kind of run his course as an enlisted man, he went back and became an officer and like was involved in like war after war after war.
He was in the Boers War, World War I, and World War II.
And a handful of other conflicts.
And probably some smaller conflicts in between. Yeah. And he got shot like a crazy amount of times.
So at one point, this guy was like trying to, like he knew that he needed to amputate a finger or something because it was like.
He cut it off.
Yeah, the doc wouldn't cut it off. So he's like, give me the knife. And he cut his own finger off. Yeah. Dude probably had some severe problems from being shot in the head because he lost his left eye, I believe.
He got shot in the head and lost his eye. And,
yeah, like crazy story, super long history. But ultimately, he ends up going to Asia after World War II to kind of establish relations between Great Britain or whatever. I never know who is it. Britain? Is it England? What is it? Are they UK? I'm not the only one.
Great Britain. Yeah.
I'm not the only one who feels this way about this country that we don't know what to call.
Great Britain or the United Kingdom.
Yeah. So he was establishing relations, and when Mao, he had met Mao at some dinner party, and he basically was like, "Oh, he's just a fanatic, and he doesn't mean business." But what was funny is the way he described Mao was very similar to how Hitler had been described prior to World War II. You're like, okay, so you had World War II, you had Hitler who had committed some of the worst atrocities, and you lived through all that, yet somehow in the peacetime complacency, you failed to recognize Mao for the tyrannical monster that he would end up being for the Chinese people. Yeah. Like, it's just wild to see how history can repeat itself that quickly. And right under the noses of these, experienced military experts who really should have sniffed that out. But I guess,
Well, I mean, literally, not World War II hadn't even ended yet. And there was people like General Patton who were talking about the Soviets being the biggest threat because... we had the military in Europe already at that time, and he was trying to influence our own government to go to war with the Soviets because he understood, well, one, they'd been weakened because they'd lost millions of people fighting the Germans.
Yeah, lots of millions.
And he was like, this is the time to do it. Because
they didn't even have ammunition.
Yeah, he's like, if we don't do it now, we're going to have to be fighting them sooner or later. And of course, we did have the Cold War.
Yeah. So what exactly? So I had mentioned this the other day. I keep bumping my mic thing, but you have I know Patton had been misquoted or like misconstrued when he said we fought the wrong enemy, when he referred to like the war with the Nazis, and I think this gets very misconstrued, and people will get on some weird tangents, and I don't know, maybe they're like neo-Nazis or something, but like, oh yeah, we fought the wrong people. It's like, I don't think he necessarily meant that we shouldn't have fought the the Nazis.
No.
But he just recognized there's a bigger threat coming.
Yeah, if anybody questions his motivation against the Nazis, they just need to learn about Patton. He was the Nazis were very afraid of Patton because he was murdering them. He was tearing them up.
Did you see the you've watched the movie Patton?
Yeah.
So there's the guy that's like essentially kind of claiming shell shock.
That's a true story. That was a true.
Yeah, and he basically slapped the dude upside the head.
Slapped him in the face in a hospital tent because he was complaining about shell shock when he was there with a bunch of people that were like really torn up physically. And shell shock then is what we call PTSD today.
Yeah.
And the guy was in the hospital tent.
Do you want us to get kicked off
Patton,
of all
he
airways?
Was hardcore old school. Yeah, he was hard. He was like that's you're a coward. You're not wounded unless you're physically wounded.
Yeah.
But.
Would you say that we know better now? Let's go on a tangent. Let's go on a ride.
About PTSD, well, I don't know anything about that subject. There's obviously that's a legitimate thing, and people that suffer from it, it can be debilitating. And I've not been in combat, and thank God don't have PTSD, but I know that's a real thing, and so whether he should or shouldn't have done that, that's definitely not something that I can speak about.
I see, walking him back. You didn't want to go for it.
Well, I really, I regard General Patton as one of the best generals in our history.
Yeah,
one of the best generals of all time.
I did not like his proposed changes to uniforms.
Yeah,
it looked a little outlandish. No, but that was an interesting scene, and I was talking to a friend of mine earlier today about that. People kind of weirdly hiding behind trauma in a. I don't know. I know my mics keep picking up every time I swallow, so I apologize to everybody, but This weird tendency, and I don't know why I'm kind of harping on it, but where we hide behind trauma as if like, well, I've got PTSD, or hiding behind a diagnosis. I don't think that we should avoid, confronting our own traumatic experiences, because it's only by like kind of airing out your issues that you're really going to figure them out. Now, you shouldn't air them out to any Tom, Dick, or Harry and try to figure it out that way. There's better ways to deal with these things, I think. And honestly, like from a Christian perspective, there's a book up here on my shelf called Peace of Soul that kind of covers a lot of these things. Like, to some degree, there's our own cooperation or our own sinfulness that plays into trauma, where it's not necessarily that I sinned by, like, I didn't, murder a bunch of people in like some village or something like that, but we want to pass the buck to somebody else and say it was because of that person or this experience that I am so traumatized.
Well, I mean, I've definitely met guys, I'm sure you have too, that in that same regard that you're talking about, there's been people that have been deployed and, served their country honorably, but then they come home and they're derelicts, and they will just justify it by saying derelict.
Derelict.
Yeah,
okay. Like
it. They act. They just
like
behave,
Cool Hand Luke.
Yeah, they behave any way they want. They feel like their own actions can be justified because they were deployed or something like that.
Yeah.
And in the same sense, not everybody that claims they have PTSD have PTSD.
Yeah.
Or if they're having struggles in life, instead of just attributing it or trying to confront their actual problems, it's just easier to throw that off as PTSD or something like that.
Yeah. And I think maybe that's it. Maybe that's where I get frustrated, because like I've taken care of patients before who I don't want to like violate HIPAA or anything, but essentially somebody claimed that she was getting in the process of like being this is about to, well, I feel like we're there. This person was alleging that somebody had attempted to sexually assault her, and follow that wherever your imagination can go, unfortunate as it might be. Come to find out, as the story turns, she was just covering up for somebody who murdered somebody else and wanted to give him a reason for it. But she had picked up all sorts of sympathy in that moment for her claims of being sexually assaulted. And like this, it's like, I don't know, like this lie of I'm a victim. It's like you weren't a victim. You just were a liar.
Yeah.
And then there's other situations where you're like, okay, you claim that you were sexually assaulted, yet by all accounts you were like doing this of your own volition up until you had guilt. I don't know, I'm getting off the rails for sure, but there's just a lot of like weird frustrations that I have with people when they claim certain things to try to like make them feel better, when in reality it actually just separates them further from actual peace.
Oh yeah, no, I mean,
because it builds up a wall. Like you can't, unless you're honest with yourself and with things like shame and guilt are actually a good thing. It's your conscience working and telling you, hey, look, you shouldn't have done this, but like there's a way forward.
I think that's a problem of human nature that can be,
for sure.
That could be in any area of our life. It doesn't necessarily have to do anything with rape or military.
Yeah, any
conflict,
part of
anything,
morality,
and that goes back always to the beginning of the first human beings. I mean,
Yeah.
But that's yeah. I mean, like you said. I mean, as a Christian, we have our understanding of how we should behave and how we should confront our own personal thoughts and feelings, and when we have shame or guilt and things like that, you don't want to play a victim in your own mind, because that's not good for you.
Yeah, it just confounds the problem and confuses it.
You can be a victim of something, but to have the mentality of a victim, I don't think is healthy for anybody. Even if you're a legitimate victim,
Yeah.
It doesn't help you to have pity on yourself. That doesn't mean I don't have empathy for people, but I mean, even for myself, if I start like feeling like, oh, woe is me or something like that, I'm like, what am I doing? That's not going to help me out. Like, come on, man. Like,
I don't remember who it was. It was like, no one should attend the pity party.
Yeah.
You shouldn't ever throw pity parties, but you should definitely never attend them, even if they're like. It's just.
I don't want anybody that does actually have legitimate issues to feel like if they're having an issue, they shouldn't recognize that it's okay to have problems.
Oh yeah,
we all got problems.
It's okay to not be okay.
It's okay to if you're feeling bad, you got depression, anything like that, like get some help. It's okay to get help.
Yeah.
But I'm just saying, like, don't wallow in your own problems. Like, don't go out and drink and sleep around or justify your actions of just staying in your home all day and, being like, well, I don't go around people because I'm depressed, things like that. That's not going to help you.
Yeah, and then there's this weird piece of the brain that when you are feeling this, like, just desolation where you feel like you're just too crappy for society or whatever, I'm better off not involving myself with somebody else because they're going to end up, I'll bring them down.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe you might, but also they might help build you up. Like, we're made for community.
Yeah. Socialization's good.
Yeah.
Yeah. No,
not socialism, people.
Not socialism, socializing. Yeah. No, you're right. And as a Christian, I genuinely believe that God created us to be social people.
Yeah, we were made for communion. We were made to be with each other.
To be around people, talk to people, to spend time, help each other. Help each other.
Mm-hmm. I mean, St. Paul talks about this a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's so much that we, I'm like the king of tangents on this podcast. Luckily, it's my show, so it's easy to do.
Yeah.
But yeah, all right. So let's get back to it. Why should anybody value your opinion on Russia?
Well, like I was saying earlier, is just
before I interrupted you.
To make it as simple as possible, from the lessons we learned in World War II and the events that led up to World War II, it's in the best interest to not let a larger country, especially a superpower like Russia, steamroll another country like Ukraine.
Yeah, because they've also done this before, right? Didn't they? Like,
yeah, they have puppet governments all around them in Belarus and in Georgia. Yeah. They basically were like, in a metaphor, they put a gun to their head and like, you're gonna put the people we want in power that are gonna be completely subservient to us, or we're gonna destroy your country. And that's what they try to do with Ukraine. They were trying to put their own puppet regime in Ukraine, and Zelensky basically gave. So Putin has said many times that he would like to rebuild the Soviet Union. Yeah. He actually has gone farther to say that he'd rebuild the Russian Empire from the 1500s. So anyway, I believe, this is my opinion, I believe, because it's a fact that Ukraine would not have lasted 2 weeks without the Americans and Europeans' help, and mainly Americans, with our intel, our weapons, everything. So if we wouldn't help them at all, Ukraine would have steamrolled them in 2 weeks. Especially at that time when Joe Biden was president. I feel like that would have absolutely emboldened China to take over Taiwan. And then if Russia would have easily taken over Ukraine, they would have taken over the rest of the Baltic states, like Moldova, Estonia, I can't remember, Bulgaria, some of those other countries.
Latvia.
Latvia.
Yeah, a lot of
those smaller countries that are not part of the NATO. So then basically you've now allowed the basically almost like another Soviet Union to develop.
Yeah.
And now we're back in another Cold War. Why would we let that happen? So we do have a vested interest. It's not that I'm particularly care about Ukraine, and I definitely don't like Zelensky. I think a lot of the Ukrainian government is corrupt. The people are corrupt. I look at it from an American standpoint. Hey, if we allow these big powers to regain power and we have to fight them down and beat them by plane, tank, every other way, you got to take them down plane by plane, ship by ship, tank by tank, person by person. It's going to cost us lives. And it's like, why would we do that? We've already done that. We should not let World War II have been in vain. We should maintain the power that we established in World War II. We should maintain it. And we should not allow that power to be given up by allowing other countries to retake smaller countries.
Yeah.
In that scenario, I mean, so you got another example like with Israel and Hamas and Hezbollah, in that situation, Israel is technically now taking over the territory of the Gaza Strip, but that's a completely different scenario.
Yeah, I don't think we have time to go into the...
Yeah, they're not the aggressor in that situation, but Russia is a superpower.
Yeah. Well, but, I mean, back to the point, like... this is maybe a different question. This is definitely a different question. Why should we trust our government, who has so many times lied to the American people? Why should we trust them when they say that Russia is bad?
So, I definitely question when you say the government. That's a very vague term. The government's pretty big, and our information comes not just from our government. You can, just go over there with a camera and look at what is happening over there.
War is happening for sure.
Yeah, war is happening, but why is it happening? And there's people that will say, well, Ukraine provoked them, and Putin's not really. Yeah,
we've been funneling money into Ukraine for decades essentially, and providing all sorts of undermining the Russian people for, like, I don't know, it never stopped happening.
Yeah,
The
no,
Russian-
it was definitely a big failure on our part after the Soviet Union collapsed in the 90s to not become partners with Russia.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, there's definitely not saying that Ukraine, like I said, I'm not saying Ukraine are good people or even a good government, but the fact of the situation is that.
Because wasn't Zelensky essentially like a Saturday Night Live kind of dude? Like,
Yeah, I don't know anything about him really. I don't really like him though, just by the way he talks and the stuff that I've heard about him, And I do know that the Ukrainian government's very corrupt. Like I said, I don't really care about. I mean,
aren't
as
all
a person, I
governments
care about
corrupt?
the Ukrainian people, obviously. But from a nation standpoint, I don't give 2 cents about Ukraine. I care about our interest in that situation.
Yeah.
And it's not in our interest because if Ukraine stopped fighting today, there would be no Ukraine because Russia would take them over. If Russia stopped fighting today, the war would end. That's how I know who the aggressor and the bad guy is in that situation.
yeah, because I guess expansionism is a bad thing.
Well, you've got an entire sovereign nation, and they want to be their own nation, and you got another bigger nation that's trying to take them over by force.
I mean, isn't that how the United States got started, though?
Yeah, but I mean that's like I said, I mean but somebody's got to be at the top. So is it going to be us or is it going to be Russia and China? Another good way to understand who the bad guy is in that situation is look at the allies of Russia.
I was hoping you would
You've
go
got
there.
the allies of Russia, the direct allies of them. You see them shaking hands. They're doing weapons deals. They've announced that they are allies. They shake hands with each other's leaders. Is Iran,
Yeah.
China, and North Korea. They're best friends. They're an
Yeah.
axis of evil. And Bill O'Reilly just came out with a book called Confronting Evil, and
Yeah.
Putin is on the front of the cover. He's on the front of the cover with Hitler and Mao and Stalin. I mean, you can learn about Putin easily and find out about him more than from resources that aren't our government.
Okay, I was going to ask, 'cause, like, isn't this just our government, like,
No,
pushing forth their own agendas, though?
No, you can find out about what's going on in Russia from a vast array of sources that are
Wikipedia
not.
does not count.
No, from independent journalists to people that have left Russia in the droves.
Yeah.
you can, and like I said, I've been to Russia, and I'll give you an example of just my example, which that's obviously anecdotal, but Russia. I mean, Putin has gotten to the top by murdering his opponents, and he stays in power by murdering his opponents, and not just of his opponents, but his opponents' families, their friends. He puts them in prison. I mean, I think he in his own country, his own people, is probably responsible for over 100,000 people murdered since he's been in power.
Which, admittedly, this is over the course of, 20 years?
20 years. But the only reason it's not more is because he doesn't have the ability to do more. But anyway, so
Yeah, I'm not
100,000
advocating
people
for
murdered is
murder.
pretty not, it's not cool. But when I was in Russia, I remember I was there in Red Square on New Year's Eve, which is the Russians' that's their biggest holiday of the year. In Red Square, and Putin was there at the Kremlin. When he's there, that's like the Russian people's White House. When he's there, they put on a big light, like a white light. It's the girl I was dating at the time. She said that tells you that Putin's home. And I was joking with her before we went out. I was like, what if I go around saying something bad about Putin or something like that, And she was very serious about this, which, normally we're obviously lighthearted about a lot of things, but she was like, you can't say anything bad about Putin. Like, you can't. like seriously, we can't leave here if you can't promise me that you will not utter a single thing about Putin. And I was like, I'm not. I was just kidding. Obviously, I knew that. Obviously, I wasn't gonna do that. But just the hint of me joking about it was serious enough. And this girl was from a well brought up.
She was
family.
the daughter of an oligarch. Okay.
No, yeah, she was from a wealthy family. She was a civil engineer, very well educated. It wasn't like So anyway, but yeah, she was like, you can't say anything bad about Putin.
Yeah.
So. And, that's gives you an idea of the atmosphere there.
Yeah, because here in the U.S., you can say whatever you don't like about Trump, Biden, or anybody, anywhere, anytime. And chances are you're not going to
end up in a gulag.
But isn't that like, but what about like the idea of treason? Like, I'm not saying that you should be thrown into a gulag or any kind of prison for speaking out against your government, but like, treason isn't a thing in the U.S. anymore. Like, you can hate the U.S. all you want and talk trash and actively undermine the United States, in every possible way that you can imagine. And there's no, it's not treason, it's just free speech. Like, somehow this seems wrong. Now, short of doing violence or something like that, but I'm not saying at all that your experience with don't mention Putin is a reasonable thing, but it to some degree, it seems like maybe we need a little bit of that. Like, you can't just say, you know what, I want to go.
Well, there is a legal definition of treason, and what would constitute actual treason. You would have to talk to a lawyer about that.
Yeah, but but
that is still a thing that you can be prosecuted for. In the United
but it
States.
doesn't seem
because there
like
have been people that have been prosecuted.
But
for
how
it.
many people, like, over especially during election cycles, you'll have people on both sides saying things like, "Oh, we should shoot this person." Or whatever, and like, whoa!
Actively calling for violence is against the law
against
a particular person.
But it seems very rare that it gets prosecuted.
Well, it was just a person in the news the other day that got arrested for doing that to Elon Musk, literally just like 2 days ago. He was calling for direct violence against Musk, and they went to his house and put him in jail because he was calling for, like, he was saying, we need to kill Musk. We need to go and like cut his head. Like, he said something like, "I'll pay somebody like $1,000 if they go to Musk and kill him," or something like that.
Oh gosh.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, okay. Well, that kind of, I stand corrected here because in my head, and admittedly, I stay under a rock as best I can. Like, I try not to be on the news, and I try not to be on social media too much unless I'm posting like this content or some reel about me being in an ice bath or whatever. You're welcome. But like, I guess I kind of feel like. It seems, anyways, that you can say whatever you want about somebody, but I guess you can't. Like, obviously, that's a case where once you start like putting your money where your mouth is, like, then you have a problem. Yeah. Unless you're about to like shoot Trump in the head, like that guy in that field who, like, everybody's like, "Oh yeah, there's a guy walking around with a ladder and a gun."
And there's been some cases too in the military. I can't remember. It was a guy. I don't know. It was a few years ago that got caught releasing like sensitive classified information. He was like a transgender guy in the military.
Oh yeah,
yeah. And I think they prosecuted him for treason.
You?
And it wasn't me. No, that was before I transitioned. Yeah, that I'm pretty sure. I can't. His name was like Bradley or something like that. He was a private. He was like a PFC, but he was like some kind of way he had
some security,
some very high level information, and he was like selling it. And I'm pretty sure they prosecuted him for treason, but I could be mistaken about that. But
dang. Yeah. Well, I have let's take a little break, and then we'll get back into some stuff. Yeah, it's probably like one of the best beers I've had in a long time.
Yeah, man. Brown ales, dude, they're good.
Poured this thing like Hillary. I guess. All right, so I do want to get into.
Is it recording again?
Oh, I never turned it off. Oh. Gosh, poured this beer like Hillary, big time. No, I wanted to get into kind of like why exactly. Because I know your story. About like your travels to Russia to some degree, especially like your romantic endeavors there, because you've dated girls from Russia. Hang on a second. Talking to that thing.
Hello.
All right, it's still working. I thought I turned it off. You turned it off. But like I know your history to some degree, but some other folks, I think it might be interesting at least from some form of like a testimonial type deal. You had a pretty significant conversation with the Lord. So let's go over, just tell me about your dating this Russian girl that you were engaged to at one point, right?
Yeah.
I just want to pry into your life, and I want everyone to hear about it.
Yeah, so you're talking about the story I've told a few people just because it was very miraculous and something, if something on that level happens to you, it's real. It's definitely something worth sharing. Because I am a Christian and believe in God and have a relationship with Him. And there was a girl that I met when she first come over here to the U.S. traveling, and we got to talking for a while. And I went over there and saw her a few times, and seemed to have a lot in common, which is kind of weird. You wouldn't think I'd have a lot in common with somebody from Russia, but she was very intelligent. She seemed to have good character.
I thought you said you had a lot in common with her.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Except for that, yeah. But no, anyway, yeah. Anyway, so we had some chemistry, and she, you know, she's was going to have a wedding there in Moscow.
She.
And, well, we were going to get married there. I went over there and we'd gotten our marriage licenses and everything, and I came back, and it was another month or two later.
So this wasn't like a mail-in-order bride situation. This was like you guys had dated while she was here.
Yeah, no, she was not that.
Okay,
Yeah,
just
she
making
was
sure
from a very
everybody-
wealthy family, very well-educated, well-traveled. She was anyway. She actually lives here in the United States now.
Does she?
Yeah. Anyway. Yeah. So anyway, it was something I'd kind of felt like I'd kind of forced myself into the situation, maybe rushed into it a little bit, and I don't know. I just didn't feel right about it, but we'd gotten to the point where there was already a wedding set up and everything, and I was just like, man, I was on the flight to go over there, an international flight, which if anybody's ever done many international flights, they're kind of a higher tier than domestic flights for I don't know what reasons, but it's a big deal for an international flight to be canceled, especially from the United States, especially one directly to Russia. But I said a prayer before I got on the plane. I said, Lord, it's beyond my control to not do this right now because I don't have the willpower to call this off. But I was like, if it is your will not for me to not be married to this girl, have something happen between now and here for me to not get married. I'm already at the airport on the jetway getting onto the airplane when I say this prayer.
It wasn't your dad was going with you, right?
Yeah. And we
Man,
get on
you
the
got to talk into the mic, man.
we get on the jet on the plane, and like 45 minutes goes by and the captain's like, "Yeah, we got some maintenance issues, won't be long." And that, when I heard that, I was like, okay.
Yeah.
And then like another hour goes by, and he's like, "Yeah, if we gotta get a new part, it's gonna have to take some time." I was like, "Oh man!" And then like 2 hours go by, and he's like, "Yeah, we're gonna have to cancel the flight." I was like, "Oh my gosh!" I was like, "This is shoot." Anyway, get off the plane, and I communicate with her over there. Told her what was going on. Of course, she's upset. And I was like, "Don't worry." I was like, even though at that point I should have been like, "Man, this is truly divine intervention," but. I was like, I'll try to get another flight. I could not get any other flight over there. So, didn't happen. And it couldn't have happened anyway because another month later, COVID happened. And you couldn't travel abroad. So, yeah. We ended up not working out. But that was definitely a something where, I can make a testimony to God's direct hand in my life there. So
yeah, that's pretty wild. Like, yeah. I mean, I think everybody has to some degree some bit of a story where God has touched their lives, and whether you want to call it miraculous or not, I think maybe when people think miraculous, they think of like Jesus raising Lazarus from the dead or something, and that's admittedly like for sure a miracle, but
it doesn't have to be something like that.
I don't think it has to be.
No, it's the small things that you wouldn't understand really at first how much they affect your life, but.
Yeah, it's like, well, you're either going to call it a miracle or you're going to call it some divine coincidence or just a coincidence or random chance in like that order where you kind of step it down. But I don't think you can say, hey, Lord, I think I may have made a mistake. If this is your will for me to not get hitched, I'm stupid. Please tell me otherwise.
Yeah.
I mean, that's my prayer often. Like, am I doing something stupid? Like, I'm really dumb. You're going to have to smack me upside the head. And like, there have been a handful of times in my life where I could say definitively, like, oh yeah, I would not have chose this at all. But like, God decided I should do things differently. A little light went off, man.
Yeah, is it working?
Yeah, you just got to touch the other side. There's a little button there. Not that it really matters, I guess. Above that button. It's not those, it's... There you go. Okay. The other red one didn't turn on right.
So
they're still green.
So anyway, on that subject though, I think it's good to also think about the fact that a lot of people have probably experienced like what you just mentioned, situations where God had a direct hand in their life and they probably knew it. Maybe at first they obviously acknowledged it was a miracle. Maybe later on they doubted maybe like, man, it could have just been extreme coincidence or something like that. But there are certain circumstances, like I just mentioned, that is beyond a shadow of a doubt. And you can reference other people that have had even more extreme things. Like I know there was I watched a lot of World War II stuff. It was a Marine that was on one of those islands in the Pacific in World War II, and he was talking about a situation where he said he wasn't a Christian. He didn't even believe in God, but he said he was on the beaches of one of these islands over there in the Pacific fighting the Japanese, and he said he was running, he was under fire, or he was in the midst of combat, and he was like running full sprint. And he said literally it was like a loud voice, and he yelled at him and said stop, and he said he just stopped, and he said freaking machine gun fire went right in front of him. He said if he had not stopped, he'd have got cut down. So it's things like that happen to people all the time. And so if you want to at least acknowledge that, you must acknowledge that there is God. Now, people have different names for God. They worship different. But if you're going to at least acknowledge, you have to acknowledge the existence of God. In my opinion, like it's illogical to not do that. So then the next step is, if you're going to acknowledge God, then you got to really start saying, hey, if God is real, which I believe, then that's a pretty big deal.
Yeah.
There is a being that is God. That's a pretty serious thing.
There's something that created everything.
Yeah.
Out of nothing. I mean, that's a whole nother topic to get into. But I mean, there's so many little occasions where. So that's one of those occasions for me. Like, and I don't remember if I've mentioned this on the show or not, but where you kind of start down a path and you think like, all right, well, I sort of have walked with the Lord my whole life. And one of my spiritual directors back in the day, shout out to Father Mullins again. Hopefully he listens. Or he's the one that turned me on to Introduction to the Devout Life, and I've mentioned him on the show a few times. But he had said, if you are walking with the Lord your whole life, where you have a constant conversation, whether it's a little bit every day or just frequent conversation with the Lord, it can give you some assurance about your decisions, because God often doesn't. You're not going to hear some booming voice. And why this is important for me is I was early on in nursing school. Like, I had just gotten accepted, and I had I've been Catholic my whole life, been Christian my whole life, and had a pretty consistent prayer life. I prayed the rosary every day for since I was like 12 years old. My mom, for whatever reason, thought it was okay for us all to watch The Exorcist, like the original one, when I was like 12, and I've been so scared poopless since. I was like, I gotta get right with the Lord. I don't want to be possessed. Like, I don't want that terrible situation to happen to me. But I remember Father Mullen told me that about, stay close to God and you won't have to really second guess your decisions. But I'd gotten to nursing school and I hadn't really prayed a lot on this specifically. And, I was in the Marine Corps Reserves at the time. And truth be told, I was really pursuing nursing because I was very disenfranchised with the Marine Corps. Like, we had a deployment get canceled. I had dealt with kidney stones and had issues kind of throughout. I had a hernia in boot camp. Like, the Marine Corps just was not panning out like I'd hoped it would. And then being in the reserves is, I don't know if your experience was different than mine, but like motivation and the drive to like be a great Marine was not there. Like, whether it was bad leadership or bad like junior leadership, or just me. Like, I'm fully willing to take responsibility for my own lack of initiative then. But I remember I was like, I'm going to go to nursing school. My sister's a nurse. She seems to really enjoy what she does. I had a cousin who was a nurse. She seemed to enjoy what she was doing. So I was like, let me go into nursing school. I get in. I had gotten a scholarship, and the church had wanted me to show up in my dress blues because, like, big to do, whatever. And I went and I received the scholarship, and then I got like news shortly after that my parents were broke growing up. Like, we was poor folk. So I got a lot of Pell Grants. Like, I didn't have to pay for my education. So it was like, cool. I actually was getting money back from the government to go to school. It worked out really well going to community college. Shout out to community colleges everywhere. One, I think they have a better education because there's more one-on-one interaction with the students. it's good for an associate and if you're a community college, you can go higher, rock on. But anyways, so I get this scholarship from the scholarship committee at the church, and I was like, all right, well, I need to return this because I don't need it. Like, they can give it to some other students. And then I don't remember what exactly happened, but I was really second-guessing my decision to go into nursing entirely. I was like, this might have been a terrible idea. And another reason, like one other reason I liked the idea of nursing was because combat life-saving was a big thing in the Marine Corps. Especially coming from an infantry background, like we did a lot of combat life-saving and infantry training, and then periodically we would have in-services with the corpsmen and go over that stuff, how to deal with a sucking chest wound was a big one.
Yeah, I was a CLS Marine.
Yeah, so you end up like doing a lot of stuff in that realm. So I was like, well, let me go to see what nursing's about. And I get to this point, and I'm like, all right, God, I haven't talked to you about this much at all. Like, at all. I haven't talked to the Lord about going into nursing school, what to be when I grow up, like anything. I've kind of just, maybe out of obedience to the Lord, been talking to him, but not about anything going on in my life, which is a problem. Like, we should definitely be talking about what we have that's concerning us in our lives. And to make a long story long here, I'm sitting in the back of church, and I'm basically sitting there like, Lord, if you want me to be a nurse, prove it. And I remember, it's funny because yesterday the reading at Mass was actually the reading that I remembered while I'm sitting there after Mass. Like, everybody's kind of filtered out of the church. There's nobody there, just me. And I remember thinking like, well, anytime now, Lord, I'm just sitting here waiting. Like Fulton Sheen, Venerable Fulton Sheen, who one of my kids is named after, he had this thing where he said most people, instead of being like Samuel, it's in one of the book of Samuel or Kings, or it's in the Bible, but basically like, speak, Lord, your servant is listening. It's more like, listen, Lord, your servant is speaking. And I didn't hear that at the time. I heard it much later. But that was basically my position. I was like, listen up, Lord, I'm talking here. Give me a reason why I should become a nurse, which is pretty stupid. Should not be demanding things of the God who created everything. And I remember having this moment where I thought about it. Like, oh, wait a second. Jesus like rebukes Satan when Satan is tempting him after his 40 days in the desert. The devil says to the Lord, like, cast yourself down off of this high point. And, it's said that the angels will like catch you lest you dash your foot against a stone. And Jesus' reply is, thou shalt not, it's also written, thou shalt not tempt the Lord thy God. And I remember hearing this, not like in a loud booming voice, because that's what I fully expected and hoped for in my request or demand. I was really demanding of God in this moment, was tell me what I need to do. And, of course, that was not what I experienced. What I experienced was my own sheepishness in recalling this, thou shalt not tempt the Lord thy God. I was like, oh man, I'm about to get blown up or like zapped. And I was like very like, I'm so sorry, God. I did not mean, just forget everything I just said. And I walked out of the church very very humbled and disappointed that I was so arrogant, which is something that I've struggled with my whole life. Shocker. But I walk out, and there's this guy, really, really solid guy. He comes up to me. He was on our parish committee for like the scholarship, and he says, "Hey, and everybody's gone. This is probably 15 minutes after Mass has happened. There's like nobody outside, and usually, like after church, people are always congregating and catching up. Well, all that has passed, and this fella is like, hey, I was hoping I'd catch you. I was actually waiting for you." I was like, oh, what's up? He's like, hey, I saw you had given your scholarship back to the church. I was like, oh, yeah, I did. He's like, why? I was like, well, I already had money for scholarship, like for school this year. I didn't need it, and I wanted that to go to somebody else. And he's like, I thought something like that might be the case. so what does your scholarship not cover? And I was like, gas to get to school, insurance and whatnot, like just that stuff. Yeah. He's like, what about books? I was like, I think it's covered. So he's like, all right, well, I'm going to write you a check for the same amount that the scholarship was for, and I want you to, like, use it appropriately. I was like, what?
Yeah.
Like, what are you talking about? And he's like, yeah, I told you, like.
So that was God answering you right there.
Oh, yeah, never so much in my life have I been like, okay. I guess,
Yeah, it's, that's God is real, and if you commune with him and that's, in my understanding, that's what the Christian faith is. It's God teaching us how to have a relationship with him.
Yeah,
through Jesus Christ, we can have a relationship with
much more real relationship. Like God came to us in poverty. Like Joseph was a carpenter, and Mary was a handmaid of the Lord. Like this wasn't like he came in power. He came in the most humble of ways. It's an impressive thing that he knows us in our own weakness, our frailty, and nothingness, because he was there also. It's pretty wild.
Yeah.
Anyways, that's my little testimony of sorts. Yeah. What else you got, man? I've got a couple more questions, but I wanted to give you an opportunity here.
Oh, no, I appreciate it.
You're writing a book?
No, I'm not writing a book. No, no, I'm hopefully pretty near finishing up my education to be, for now, be a high school history teacher. We'll see what happens next, but.
Yeah, you're pretty close, right?
Yeah.
Why do you want to do that? Because most of the time I have like healthcare professionals on the show, but you are not a healthcare professional.
No,
never
not
worked in healthcare.
No, my best friend is a doctor. I saw him this morning. He works in Roanoke. He's an ER doctor. Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah, but it's funny. I hadn't seen him in forever. Hadn't seen you in forever. So see you on the same day.
Nice.
Yeah, but.
I think I met this guy. I don't remember his name.
You met Jim. Yeah, we played frisbee golf together.
We played frisbee golf, right?
Yeah. I have been a machinist since I basically started working as an adult.
Mm-hmm.
And I got a degree in machine technology, and that's what I've done since I was like 21 years old. So it's an interesting career. I've learned a lot. I've made good money. It's been a great thing. I think I'm just ready for something new.
Yeah,
something different. So that's why I'm going to try to something new, something different. And I have a kind of a joy in learning history, and I think it'd be neat to teach other people history. I think that history is, especially in public education, is definitely something that is lacking, because history, you call it social studies. They used to have civics, but there's a reason for that, because you have to have an educated populace to be cohesive and to be able to contribute to society and to your country.
Yeah. And
if you just got random people walking around and they don't know why they're here, why they're doing what they're doing, then you have a lot of the problems like we have today in society. We live in a fractured society. We're not on the same page like we used to be, and it's hard for a country to be successful when everybody's split and running against each other. That's a big lacking in history, because we can be different in some ways, but we should all have a foundation of similarities that hold us together.
A common goal. Yeah.
There should be some level of cohesiveness.
Yeah.
Language, traditions, principles, values, things like that. We were founded as an Anglo-Saxon people. Well, we are originated from Anglo-Saxon heritage,
mm-hmm.
and we were founded on Judeo-Christian values.
Yeah.
So that's kind of, I feel like, if I can churn out some good, churn out people that are going to be, that are going to contribute to society, I feel like that's a worthwhile thing to try.
See, you decided to go into like education. I'm just trying to have as many kids as I can.
Like Elon Musk.
No, not like Elon Musk. I have one wife, and by her, all my kids will come. That's a weird deal. But yeah. So there was something that sparked. So there's actually something similar that you pointed out. Like when we're so fractured, we have a lot of difficulties because we don't have common ground to work on, or we don't feel that we have a common ground or unity. And there's so many people today that I mean, we're longing for that. This culture, there's so many people that want to have a common goal.
Yeah.
Like, I think you and I probably ended up in the Marine Corps for similar reasons. Like, we saw, at least in our naive youth, looked at World War II, and sorry, it's my reminder to go pray. I will not forget to do that. But if we looked at World War II history, and we were like motivated by those, Basilones and like these guys from that era who saw evil in the world and like pursued it to the nth degree to wipe off from the face of the planet said evil. And now it's like we don't even know what evil is.
Well, in those days, that was like what I was talking about. You know, in that time, in that generation, and even after that generation, it hasn't been that long. But in general, for most of the country's history, generally speaking, most of our people have had some common ground to be on the same page. Obviously, you know, when our nation was confronted with do or die, people stepped forward and we fought for what, you know, we knew was right, you know, and there was pretty much a common goal. There was a common thought. And, you know, people, and that's, there's a lot of things that I am not the type of person, and maybe nobody is, to be able to put into words what that can do for not only the country, but the human experience, the soul of the people. And that obviously strengthened the soul of our country greatly. World War, you know, the trials, not just World War II, but the trials and tribulations ever since our country was founded. And a lot of people will attribute a lot of the problems that we have today for two big reasons. Well, you can say, I would say three, but a lot of people would in general just say two. One, after the Soviet Union collapsed, we had no enemy to unite us against. Another problem is our success. When a country gets so successful, you can look at the history of the world of any empire or any superpower. They rise, they plateau, they fall, and a lot of that is because of success. And thirdly, I would say, is because of a lack of people that have true, genuine relationship with God. You know,
I think you're right. There is Venerable Fulton Sheen mentioned this, that there have been 21, at least the time of his writing, which was mid 1900s. I think this book was written like 1950s or 60s, maybe before. But every of the 21 nations that have come to great power and like become like the global power, or at least global so far as the time went, you know, like ancient Rome, the globe was what ancient Rome was. Those countries have risen to power, and they fell. 17 of them were conquered from without, or from within, before they were conquered from without. So essentially, it grows so big, and then it starts to decay from within. It becomes much easier to conquer from outside.
Yeah.
And 17. Like, you wonder, are we 18?
Yeah. Well,
because we do have
that's part of the cultural war that we're having currently. Yeah. There's a lot of people that recognize that. A lot of it's how you're raised, but there's a huge percentage of the country that are trying to not only live and enjoy the freedoms that we have, because that's, well, you know, when I was, you know, we're about the same age. When I was growing up, you know, it was basically, you know, like, you know, I grew up, and country music seemed to be a lot more prevalent back then too. But a big part of country music also,
actual country music,
actually, yeah, is like a it's kind of like, you know, I don't know what the best word would be, but it's like it's capturing the spirit of our current situation of American people, which is, you know, we understood that the current situation we have now, where we have freedom, there's nobody trying to kill us, that came at a price, and we should enjoy it. You know, work, you know, obviously, you know, worship God, love your family, but work and enjoy, have fun, you know, enjoy your freedom, enjoy life, and love your country and love God, and and it's like, you've got a huge percentage of our country now that are like just miserable people, either with their own life, or they have no enemy, they have no good relationship with God, they don't understand history, or they're being brainwashed with a misrepresentation of history. And it's like, because there's so many of those people that are like actively trying to destroy the country, that we actually do have a threat, like you said, from within. So people like us and a huge percentage of the country that are just trying to work and enjoy life have to deal with lunatics all the time.
Yeah, well,
And it's it kind of makes it difficult to enjoy. And like you said, a lot of times you just want to back away and be like, I can't deal with this stuff anymore. Which there is an element to that you need to take into account. But whether we like it or not, we are involved in kind of a cultural war, which thankfully right now it seems like we have the upper hand in a way. But I mean, how do we fight that war? Seems to be the question a lot of people ask, and I think that the best way for us as Americans is to put God first, because that's what made our country possible to begin with,
Yeah.
And I think if we do that, then God will help us, and He is helping us, I believe, and so I mean but yeah, basically a country, like you were going back to what you were originally talking about, throughout history, countries rise, they plateau, they fall, and a lot of that is because from within they get fat and happy, they lose track, they lose perspective on what really matters. It's human nature.
Yeah. Well, I think there's, to some degree, you look at nations that are founded and what they're founded on. I mean, some people will disagree over this and say that we're not a Christian nation. I think there are principles that we were founded on, and those were Christian principles. And it's like when you forget what gave you the success. I mean, look at the nation of Israel. Every time they forgot about God, disaster struck.
That's a perfect example, yeah. Look at how many times Israel failed.
Yeah, and we're looking, I mean, this is I think of C.S. Lewis says salvation history is just this long story of God chasing man, and something to that effect. I'm the worst quoter / paraphraser. Yeah. But like that's where we are. If we could embrace it, and then there's a lot of people who think that God is this nice myth, or this thing that weak people cling to. And I actually can't even deny that God is something that weak people cling to. But as St. Paul says, it's in my weakness that I'm made strong. If I accept the fact that I am just a speck of dust in the grand scheme of the universe and salvation history, like only then am I able to actually do anything about it. Because like, if I assume my own, and being an arrogant guy, like you've known me for a long time, you could probably attest to some of my arrogance in some occasions. But it's only when I can say to heck with my own ego and do what hopefully God is asking me to do that I'm going to make any sort of good progress. Yeah. And cooperate with God's plan. Like we're body soul composites. We have a lot that comes, in a lot of different areas, but if I can submit my own will to the will of God, because if God created me, He created me with a purpose. And if I can do the thing that He wants me to do, it's not like I'm some wretched slave. Now you could, depending on which saint you read, you might find the saints say like, yeah, I'm a wretched slave, but that's not what I mean. No, what I mean is, if I can accept the plan and purpose God has for me and cooperate with that, like that, it's there that I find true peace of soul. Anytime I've tried to avoid that, I have found nothing but misery. Yeah, and like disappointment. And knowing you and our conversation in the past, I feel like you could probably attest to something similar. Yeah. No, I mean the way that life is supposed to work, there's a design to it. It's kind of like. It's kind of like, when we try to not do our purpose in life, it's like we're trying to work outside of how we were designed. It's like you're trying to take a car and make it work as a boat, or make a boat work as a car, or something like that. Yeah. But yeah, in general, kind of like what you're saying, if everybody surrenders and submits their will to the Lord, then we live, because He did create us for a reason and for a purpose. If we live in that purpose, then everything will go a lot smoother. But what do we say? It's easier said than done. Yeah, but I'll say that about myself too. I mean, you and I are Christians. We've been so since we've been born. But like, what do you say to the person who's not Christian, who doesn't like believe in God? Like, how do you communicate to that person that this is something that's true? I mean, you and I have conviction, and we have our testimonies and our experiences, our lived experiences, that says there's no way that God doesn't exist. Well, it's our reality is based on three elements, I believe, which is the physical, the mental,
and the spiritual. And right now we're in the spiritual element. And you know, you can ask doctors. I mean, this is something that is taught in medical school. There is a spiritual aspect to life. And if you don't believe that, then just think about what happens to you when you think about, you know, if you got a parent, or the emotions you feel when you're around family members, or if you have a child, or if you, even certain types of music, you know, that can move you emotionally, but there's also a spiritual element involved, you know. And what we're speaking to right now is the spiritual element, and you can't convince somebody of spiritual things through intellect, through the mind. It's a spiritual thing that you have to, a person that I really like to, that helps me a lot, or someone who I have learned a lot from, is Billy Graham, and he speaks about stuff like that too. He said I can't scientifically convince you to believe in God.
Yeah.
He said you can't go to a college class to a professor and then learn and then become a Christian. Like you can't be saved in a college class through I mean, you can, but like you're not going to get a lecture course on salvation.
Yeah.
That has to be a spiritual aspect, you know. Like I can't convince you logically to be a Christian. So,
well, I think you probably can convince somebody.
You can logically convince them that there is a God. But salvation is a spiritual aspect. There's a lot of people that believe in God, but they're not Christians.
Yeah.
You know,
yeah.
I mean, so I can logically convince people there's God, kind of like we were talking about earlier.
Mm-hmm.
If you logically think, how can something come from nothing? That alone should tell you that there's a God. And then if you want to think about it more, what requires more faith? To think that our central nervous system and brain came from a single-celled organism out of the primordial soup, or was it by design? You know, it's like looking at a house and say, that just happened, or did somebody build it? So that's a logical concept. So I can make somebody be like, well, that probably makes sense, and there is a God. But a spiritual, actual, genuine relationship with a God that is real, because, you know, when people hear us talking about it, there is a very real God, and have a relationship with him. That's a spiritual aspect. Yeah,
well, it's like I love bringing things down to this is always like the best part of these podcasts, is when we get to the nitty gritty. Like you essentially, like one beer in or one drink in, you really get to the heart of it. But you know, I can tell somebody about Jared Ray Prophet all day long, but until they meet Jared Ray Prophet, it's not going to have the same effect as me telling every detail that I could possibly tell about you.
Yeah,
and that's the difference. But there's also this willingness to meet you. Like, you could know whatever you want to know about you, but until you're willing to have that encounter, it's not going to happen. And like the path from the head to the heart is the longest road there that exists. You know, like I might be convinced of so many things on a like intellectual level, but on the spiritual level, or on the, I guess, like, you know, through human frailty. One of the best sermons that I ever had, or homilies, or whatever you want to call it, but a priest said we should never mistake human frailty for hypocrisy. So while many Christians, you know, there's a lot of people that were like, I won't go to a Christian church. They're, you know, a bunch of hypocrites, and, you know, they say one thing on Sunday, but they do something different on Monday. It's like, we can't mistake human frailty for hypocrisy. Like, we're in church because we know we need to be healed. You know, and then you could take that a step further. And you and I were talking about confession recently. You know, as a theme of this podcast so far has been Introduction to the Devout Life, and St. Francis de Sales talks a lot about confession. You know, there's this need that we have on a personal level and on a spiritual level to confess our not grievances, our sins, or our, I don't know what the word I'm looking for is. Unfortunately, that's how it goes with the one drink in. My brain, I start to be more difficult to find words, or I have more difficulty finding words. But you know, you have confession where we need to have this, you know, talking about communion earlier, or community earlier, we need to be able to express ourselves and forgive our neighbor. Like, this is a very real thing in the Christian life. And then in a secular life, if I'm not able to forgive somebody, this was someone from one of the homilies lately at Mass, was if we harbor hate in ourselves, again, the king of tangents, but if we harbor hate towards somebody, say you were like, man, if I say I was like, man, Prophet's a real piece of work. Yeah. I can't stand that guy. And I never said anything to you about why it was that you made me so angry or hateful towards you. and I just harbored that hatred towards you, that's just me drinking poison and hoping you'll die. It's not me. I'm not doing anything. You don't feel my wrath. You don't feel my hatred. You don't feel any of my emotions towards you. You just are like, all right, whatever.
Hate dissolves its container.
Hate dissolves its container. I like that.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, it's drinking the poison and hoping the other person will die. Like we need to be able to have
There's a lot of hate in our
conversations.
country right now.
Oh, for sure.
It's
I mean,
boiling over.
well, you look at any media source and you're like, what the heck is going on?
That's all they do is hate. Yeah, it's a lot of hate.
How do you fix it?
Well, like I said, it's an easy thing to say, or it's easier to say it's easier to say than do. But I think all things can be fixed if you have a genuine relationship with God.
Yeah.
Because there's a supernatural element of having a relationship with God that helps you to do things that you wouldn't otherwise be able to do, like with lust and hate and jealousy and envy and pride. Now, that doesn't mean that it's a spiritual walk. So
Look at you naming all of the
yeah. So sometimes you'll fall, and we all do, and I do, and but to even be able to attempt it, you can't even attempt the Christian life unless you have been. And I mean, you're Catholic, I'm Protestant, but it could be similar but different. You might have a different way of describing it, but being born again, being saved, and to have a genuine relationship with the Lord, you have to have it has to be, they say a coming to Jesus moment, but you have to be born again. You have to have had a real.
Well, that's what Jesus said. You have to be born again.
You have to be born again. You have to have there has to be some point in your life where you have an event where you have met Jesus. You have got to know that you know him, and then his spirit, because he is a spirit, he is real, he's alive, lives in you and gives you the ability to live the Christian life. Yeah. Like I said, you're still going to have problems, you're still going to fail in certain ways, but you're living a life that is completely different than somebody who is just trying to live by a set of rules. That is impossible. A person can't live the Christian life without Jesus. You can't. It's impossible. And when you say that, you're like, well, what does that mean? Well, what is Jesus? Well, he is a spirit. Jesus is real. He's alive. He's God, but he is with us. He's omnipresent and a spirit that can live in you if you invite him and have a relationship with him.
Yeah. Well, on the flip side of that, like there's numerous accounts of like because baptism for you, like you, I assume were baptized later on in life. Like
I was baptized as a kid, and then later on when I got older. Yeah.
Okay, so like in the Catholic tradition, we get baptized as babies, and you have godparents who essentially accept the responsibility of helping raise you in the faith. And then as you get older, we have confirmation, which is the sacrament. There's 7 sacraments, but check out Catholic Answers for more on that. But you have baptism, the Eucharist, and first where you receive the Eucharist, and that's something that kind of you do throughout your life, where you go and receive Jesus in the Eucharist, and then you have confirmation and matrimony, holy orders, last rites. I feel like I'm missing one because I've only got 6 fingers up, but maybe I said one and didn't put a finger up. Anyways, but you have these different stages in life. But as a Catholic, so you get baptized as a child, and then confirmation is where you essentially say, like, yes, I'm going to like become like I believe what the church has taught me. And there's the thing with sacraments is the description of it. I'm trying to put together some resources on this, but a sacrament being an outward sign of God's grace. I'm gonna have to look it up. I've been trying to write on this, and I told you the other night, like I'm trying to put together some resources on what the sacraments are, what confession is, because I think confession is a super important thing. But the question to what a sacrament is the outward sign instituted by Christ to give grace. That's from the Baltimore Catechism, which I think asks or begs more questions than it maybe answers. But if it's something that gives grace, so baptism is is something that gives you grace, which is like a supernatural gift to live a Christian life.
To be baptized is, like in my understanding, it's just like it's your sign that you're making a recommitment.
Yeah,
making either initial commitment or recommitment. It's an outwardly sign of your commitment.
Yeah.
to God, to Jesus, and that's
But it's something that actually communicates something more, because it's also when we express this thing outwardly, there's an infusion of the grace of God that dwells within you. Like until you're baptized, like Jesus says, unless you're like born again of the Spirit, you can't enter the kingdom. I'm the worst at quoting scripture.
Yeah, me
just
too.
for everyone.
Me too.
But Jesus talks about this, and Nicodemus is like, well, how am I supposed to like re-enter my mother's womb? Like, Jesus, that's not what you're doing. That's not what we're talking about here. But there's a level of, man, my sister, Carolyn, sorry, I know you're going to listen to this at some point and be like, I can't believe he's blanking on this. But we need to essentially accept Jesus. Like, I know this kind of maybe burns up some Catholics who are like, I accept Jesus as my personal Lord and Savior. And you're like, okay, that's a good first step. But there's a lot more that's
that's just the
asked.
Beginning. Yeah,
that's the first step on the path.
But once again, that's kind of, in my understanding, that's you're taking the initial step to allow Jesus to take you all the way, and He will. But and that's what's really hard for a lot of people, including myself, to understand is when you first come to you have to basically surrender and say, Lord, help me to know you and save me. And that's when He'll come in and help you. But when you initially try to, and I think that's what stumbles up a lot of people, is when you, especially, people that aren't saved, but they want to believe, their initial concept of it is just like looking at the entire Christian faith as like an enormous undertaking. Mm-hmm. And I've even heard Jordan Peterson, I'm sure you're familiar with talk about that. And he's like, to really say that you are a Christian, what that really means, he said, that's a pretty big deal. To say that I'm going to live my life for God, that's a pretty big thing. To say that I'm going to make a commitment to the Lord, to say that I'm going to live by these values, these principles, and to be obedient to Him. And that's, but like, again, you can't do it without. But if you have Jesus with you, He'll help you. It's not, you know what I'm saying? Well, I'm not saying it makes it easy, but
Jesus says, like, my come to me, all you weary, and I'll give you rest. Like, for my
yoke is light.
My burden is easy, my yoke is light, or something to that effect. Like, it's so paradoxical. You think like, no, there's no burden that's going to be light. But there's the concept. I don't remember who was saying this, but think about the yoke of oxen. It's a thing that has like two.
Yeah, it hooks them together to pull.
So two. Mm. So if it's Jesus' yoke, like he's going to be carrying it with you.
He's carrying the weight.
Yeah. And thankfully for you and I being short, I'm sure Jesus is probably about 6 foot, so he'd definitely be carrying the weight for us.
Yeah, no, Jesus. I remember my older pastor. He gave a sermon one time that said the title of the sermon was "Jesus was not a wimp." Mm-hmm. Like physically, he was a strong guy. No, but anyway,
you couldn't be.
That's kind of that's beside the point. But I mean that's. I think that more people are. It's a good conversation to have that more people should talk about. Is Jesus being the center or being the focal point of the religion of Christianity, because He's done the work. And I think when people say that, and especially in America, people repeat these words so much that I think people become numb to it. And it's, if you really think about what we're, including myself, growing up, but I mean, if you really think about what we're saying here, it's a free gift that if you take it, it's He's done the work, and He's basically given you the invitation to live the life that you were created to live, and in that you will find freedom and things that aren't easily able to be explained in words, but you'll find freedom and purpose and meaning and a joy and a peace that cannot be acquired any other way.
Yeah.
And I think ultimately that's what most people are looking for, is through drugs, sex, money, career,
all the things,
even family. People are looking for a sense of joy and peace and meaning, but they are never going to have that true, genuine peace, because they're created for a reason, and they're created to have a relationship with God. That's what we're supposed to be here with God. He created us to commune with Him. Yeah.
Well, and that's when the creature. It's the quote. I think it was from. It's either St. Paul VI or St. John Paul II. But when the creature forsakes the Creator, the creature itself becomes unintelligible. So basically, like if we don't recognize that we were created by someone or by something, then we fail to recognize that we were even created for anything. And then when we don't know what we're created for, well, what are we even doing? We're just a bunch of ants without any cause.
Yeah. That's something I've thought about a lot too. It's like, I try to think about things, even like, like various aspects of life. Like if I'm a conservative debating a liberal, or if I'm a man debating a liberal.
We know you're a liberal debating.
Exactly. Or if I'm a conservative, or if I'm a Christian having a conversation with somebody who's not a Christian.
Yeah.
When we're speaking about the things that me and you were talking about that are pretty heavy,
mm-hmm.
a lot of people too.
What are you talking about? This burden is light, bro.
Yeah. A lot of people are initially thinking about like, well, if everything you're saying true, why doesn't like God just come down and
He did that already?
Yeah, well, he's done that. He did that. God did do that. He did come down. He did, and he's like, well, if you really stop and think about it, it's like God has done everything that you are actually thinking about if you learn about it. He's done everything that you want to initially be like, why doesn't he do that? He has done that, and he will do that with you in a way that only he knows is best for you. And it's I think too, it's like throughout most of history, God has revealed himself to people in a way that makes it undeniable the reality of our existence. It's like, why are we even here to begin with? And that's what stumbles up a lot of people too, is ever since Adam and Eve, God created us to be in communion with him. And I think that when enough people, this is just, I think that people need to realize that if enough people in the world fall away from God, a certain percentage, I referenced this from Sodom and Gomorrah, he says, if you can find 50 people or 40 people.
Yeah.
I think that, and this is my opinion, so this could be totally wrong, but I think that that thought process of why are we even here, and if what you're saying is true, why doesn't God do this and this? God is telling you. If you're having a conversation with a Christian, he is speaking to you through that person, if they're a genuine Christian. And for you to understand your purpose and the reality of life and your existence is to be in communion with God. And I think that if you don't understand that, and if enough people reject that understanding, a certain percentage of the world, if it gets high enough, God will come back and be like, all right, you people have lost what you have been created for. There's not enough of you to be here for me to continue to have this, and he will have this new heaven, new earth. He's going to come back.
So essentially that's your, what's the word, eschatology, where you essentially, the end times, we will become, maybe not necessarily you and I, but the world become worse and worse. We're essentially on a downward slope.
Right.
And once it becomes so terrible, then God will come back and the second coming will happen.
And that will coincide with the percentage of people that are genuine Christians. Because as we were just speaking about earlier, how do you save America? How do you get enough people doing things right again? Genuine Christian people make the world a better place.
Yeah, there was with Richard Dawkins. I'm not familiar with the guy specifically, but I've heard enough where he basically loves the Christian world, but doesn't like Christianity. Because what the Christian world essentially espouses is freedom for the most people and the best living conditions for the most people at any given point. But he doesn't like necessarily Christianity. It's like or Christ. It's like well, you can't have Christianity without Christ. But yeah, there's a lot
of people think like that too. They're like, well, you trying to say that there's not good people that aren't Christians? I'm not saying that. There's plenty of people that are really good people that aren't Christians.
Yeah.
Or aren't even genuine Christians. They believe in God, but they're not genuine Christians. There's plenty of people like that. But you have to think, how did those people get even to that level of what you consider good? They're based on Christian values.
Yeah.
And, the source of anything that is good is God.
Yeah. Well, this is, so talking about this, there's a lot of people that I've talked to and heard where similar kind of position where you don't need God. You can just be good people. Like there's a guy that I worked with years ago who'd be like, I'm a secular humanist. And it's like, well, most of the time when humans are left to their own devices, they become deplorable people. Now, not universal. I don't mean to paint with super broad strokes, but literally almost every time in history where it was we will forsake God and pursue our own designs, that's where you end up with communist Russia back in
any society that takes that road turns into hell.
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, you look at it, there's a couple of books that I want to plug here. One, this was a weird encounter. So I didn't realize that I was in a group chat with Muzz, one of my best friends growing up, like one of the best families that I've ever known, and like am so grateful that I had interaction with them growing up. Like I can almost, I don't want to say entirely, but so significantly did they influence my faith as a youngster. And even as an adult, like this family, like the Stallings have been such a profound influence on me in my Catholicism and in my faith in general. Like, I can say without a doubt, I would be way worse off if I was not involved with this family. Thank God for the Stallings. Pop, rest in peace. Shout out to, Joe, Will, Jenny, Laura, John, Benj, and Will. Like this family has been so good to me and helped me in my faith. But I was in a group chat, didn't realize that their mom was in the group chat. Shout out to Muzz. But she had mentioned a couple things about like Russian culture and Russian heritage. They had a lot of Russian exchange students growing up. And, she lived, at the... I don't know how old she is now, but she's over 65, I think. Yeah, because mom. Anyways, but she pointed out like a lot of things within like the works of Dostoevsky. I don't know if you've read like the Brothers Karamazov or Crime and Punishment.
I've heard of that.
You need to read them.
But I don't
like
know
as a fan of or like that culture to the degree that you are, I think you would really like these books. But so she's talking about these books in this group chat, and she mentioned In Russia with God. Let me verify that I've got the title right, because it was written by a priest who was like doing mission work for the faith in Russia under communists, like Soviet Union. Where are my books? Oh, they disappeared. Let me look this back up because they all disappeared. Sorry, listeners. With God in Russia by Walter Zizek is one. So she had mentioned this in this group chat when we were talking about Russian culture and history. And then I was listening to a podcast at the time while I was painting my basement, and they mentioned this book. Like within minutes, I was like, "All right, this is God wanting me to read this book." I think because the fact that one, I was listening to so many coincidences, or I can just say like, "No, this is something that I should read," because I do have a lot of appreciation for Russian culture. I mean, you and I've talked about this to nth degree on a handful of occasions, but there's something there. So that book is one that I would like to plug, as well as. Oh, shish kebabs. The Brothers Karamazov is a really good one. Crime and Punishment, anything by Fyodor Dostoevsky. Venerable Fulton Sheen, in the book that I mentioned that I've got up on the shelf, Piece of Soul, and others, he kind of points out like there's this struggle between the soul, the mind, and the body, where we, when all of these things are at odds with the Creator, we end up with confusion. But if we can align them with the Creator, we have peace. And I mean, who isn't looking for peace, especially nowadays?
Ultimately, that's what everybody longs for, and if you have peace, then you build on it, and if you don't have peace, you're looking for it. Yep.
Yeah, and but where do we find it? Like
through Christ. Yep.
Yeah, I think that's the only outcome or the only place to look for.
Jesus
that makes sense.
told Pilate. They asked him. I forgot what Pilate asked him, but Jesus
what
said,
is
"I
truth?"
am," and Jesus said, "I am truth."
Yeah, like
well, what does that mean? Truth. Well, we all want truth. What is truth? And if you believe in the Bible and you believe that He is God, He has just told you, "I am truth." And what does that mean? Well, then read about Jesus, read the Bible, know Jesus, and He will show you the meaning to all things.
Well, and what there's a guy in the 60s or 70s that had they made a movie about it not too long ago, but basically like he was a journalist and he wanted to disprove.
He was an atheist that wanted to disprove the existence of God, and through that process, he became a Christian.
Yeah, because nobody survives a Roman crucifixion, yet somehow Jesus lived again and was witnessed by loads of
He
people.
he was witnessed by, from what I understand, after he was crucified and rose from the dead, he had over 500 personal accounts, of of people witnessing him, and the people that did, the disciples, all died. Almost not all of them, but I think 11, 10 out of the
10
12.
out of the 12, yeah.
10 out of the 12 died for him in the worst ways imaginable. And I hear people like, you don't die for a lie. Well, some people will die for something if they think it's true, but these people died on things that they accounted for, that they saw in person.
Well, the St. Bartholomew, one of the 12, like, he was filleted alive. Like, he was skinned alive.
Yeah.
You don't accept that. Like, look, you're a good dude, but I'm probably not going to be filleted alive for you, Jared.
Yeah.
Like, it's probably not going to happen.
And also, too, the people try to discredit the Bible, but the Bible was written within the time of these people living, within like 50 or 60 years, So, I mean, it's...
Yeah, the Acts, I think, was written... I know the Acts in, like... Luke, maybe? I want to say those two were written within, like... well, that and the letters from, like, Peter, Paul, James, and John, like, those letters were written early on.
And anyone that has any type of familiarity with history understands that whether you believe Jesus was the Son of God or not, Jesus is a real person that did exist historically. And you can say that in the same manner that you say that George Washington existed historically. Yes, I didn't see him personally, but I know through historical evidence that he did exist. Yes, George Washington existed in the same way that you can say that Jesus existed. Yes, but I also believe that he was God. Which
Well, then there's like, well, okay, so he was either, was it C.S. Lewis's thing? Like, he was either a prophet.
He was either a prophet, a madman, or who he said he was.
Yeah, that's it. And like, okay, well, you can't be all three.
Yeah.
Like. Yeah. So which one? And the fact that he came back from the dead,
and the fact that our entire timeline of human
existence
civilization is based off of his timeline.
Yeah,
we're living in the year 2025, and if anybody's ever been promoted in the Marine Corps, the military, it's in the year of our Lord.
In the year of our, man.
Yeah, in the year of our Lord. That is, so.
Yeah,
I mean, that's
Sergeant Jaron Ray Prophet.
Yep.
Right.
Sergeant.
That's right. Yeah, I'm a lowly PFC. Just kidding, Lance Corporal. I probably should have just been a Lance. All right. So some questions. First of all, are you single? Yes, that was a question.
Yeah.
Oh gosh. Oh, let's see some of these questions.
I'm going to say something that's. I don't want to reference this person, so I won't say it. Never mind.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, we don't want to gossip or do any sort of.
You asked me if I was single. I was going to say that America's my lover, but that's from Hitler. He said Germany's his lover.
Well,
so I don't want to reference Hitler.
Yeah, like okay, I got you.
Hitler was a bad guy. I hate Hitler. Don't think I like Hitler.
Yeah. May God have mercy on his soul. All right. This question comes from the man. Dylan Williams, my IT guy. All right, what's a historical event or military campaign that you think is widely misunderstood?
A U.S. military campaign, or just any campaign?
It just says military campaign. You can go on any tangent you would like.
I would say that the most widely misunderstood military campaign, if you will, and that I would like to acknowledge, or for anybody that's listening, is the Civil War and the Confederacy's role in the war. Yes, slavery's bad. Everybody knows that slavery's bad. Nobody wants to advocate for slavery, me included. Thank God that in our country that our legal system is built around the premise that we are all created by God equally. There is no difference in our value as human beings. That is not why people in the Civil War were fighting and dying, because most people in the Civil War in the South did not own slaves. And if you just think about it from a logical standpoint, why would you go and fight and suffer and die for something that has even no direct effect on you? The Civil War is very misunderstood by a lot of people, and it's something you can spend a lot of time talking about. But just to boil it down, the Civil War, slavery was a variable, but and if anybody wants to know, I could do my own podcast entirely on this one subject.
All right.
But that is something. For that question, the Civil War is definitely
all right. Civil War, fair enough. Yeah. Who is your favorite Confederate general? Gotta see which side I lean towards. Who is your favorite Civil War general?
My favorite Civil War general?
Mm-hmm.
Stonewall Jackson.
I knew it would be.
Absolutely.
Did you know that he was frequently not found like he was lost or anything, but he would literally walk around talking to the Lord like out loud.
Yeah.
No,
it
was pretty solid. Like,
yeah.
I mean, and I think that's a really good thing. Like, even St. Francis de Sales talks about this. Like, when we have our conversations with God in our quiet time and in our prayer time, we should set out to actually converse with the Lord. Like, almost sit down and imagine him sitting in a chair next to you and like talking to him. Like, that's a method of imaginative prayer.
Right.
That can
visualization.
A very helpful thing. All right. This one might be a bit difficult. Most unconventional or unexpected solution you have ever had to come up with in the field, Sergeant Jared Ray Prophet.
In the military?
I suppose so.
That's a good question. Is this your question?
No, I'm still rocking some of Dylan's questions.
Oh, okay. So
he better listen to this. All the way to the end.
Man, it's been a while since I was in the Marines. I did learn ingenuity in the Marines because there's been a lot of times, especially because I've gotten really into saltwater shark fishing.
You have,
and I have come up with some pretty ingenuitive things out there because you have to a lot of times. But in the Marines, I had to do a few squad challenges. My last couple of years I was a squad leader, and we would do these training events. And long story short, I had some very inexperienced guys under me, and I had to think of some unique ways to make them be able to figure out situations that wouldn't. So, for one example, would be I had guys just so we'll scratch the squad challenge. I had guys that would show up and be like, hey, I don't even have the respect enough to have pen and paper with me, which is a basic in the Marine Corps. Mm-hmm. So this happened several times. It wasn't just in my squad, but so I took them aside and read them off like an entire like 200 words out of this manual on a 7-ton truck maintenance list of like all kinds of very specific stuff about transmission fluids, oils, all kinds of crazy stuff. And then I'd be like, all right, read back to me what I just wrote to you. Of course they couldn't. I'd be like, well, we're going to do push-ups so you can repeat everything back to me. And so we were out there all day doing push-ups. And they finally got the point. I was like, if you had something to write this stuff down, you could repeat it back to me. So they did not forget their pen and paper anymore.
Nice. Man, you felt like the drill instructor there. You were like...
Well, I wasn't yelling at them. I wasn't anything. I would just be like, now tell me what I just told you. It was 4 or 5 of them, and I would read it all off, and of course...
The fact that your COC was like, gave you that much free time to do something. I mean, admittedly...
Well, if you have a home drill, you got free time.
Yeah, we had a lot of home drills. Yeah. All right. Given today's geopolitical landscape, what do you see as the biggest emerging threats? I feel like you answered this earlier with like essentially Russia and China.
Biggest emerging threats from other countries? Mm-hmm. Definitely China, yeah.
Also, leave me alone. I'm just kidding. That was... Let's see, I had a couple more.
And what to do about China is what Trump's doing, which is we need to bring back more manufacturing. We need to be independent of China, economically speaking.
Yeah. And then I feel like, this one came from my buddy James, but like, is Putin really as awful as the world makes him out to be? And I would love to be a bit more of the devil's advocate on this. I know we're running short on time, but whenever the media in the world, like, because all news is propaganda, right? Like, you look at anything, anytime in history, like the reason the Spanish flu is called the Spanish flu is because Spain was the only ones that were not like putting, I don't want to know what the word is, basically like inhibiting news. They were saying like, you cannot, or you have to just report whatever you like. They weren't stopping the media from reporting, whereas every other nation was like, anything that might hurt the war effort, you cannot report. And the idea of all of our military being destroyed by the the flu that actually originated in Kansas, in the U.S. and traveled throughout the world in World War II. It was really like a recipe for disaster. That's why it's called the Spanish flu, because they were the first people to report on it. But realistically, it actually started in the U.S. So it's hard for me to be like, yeah, Putin's the worst guy ever and Russia is the worst. And like, I'm very much so like, there was a State of the Union address that I had mentioned to you, I guess last year before, something, that Putin had basically said, look, the U.S. claims to be on this moral high horse, but they have spent over $150 billion at the time on this war, giving munitions to Ukraine. If they were really on some moral high horse, they would not be so. They would spend more money on humanitarian affairs than they would on war. But obviously, they are a warmongering tyrant, and that's really hard to argue. Like, we have spent almost $300 billion, I think, is the current tally on this war that we aren't involved in, really.
Yeah, we're not directly involved in it.
Yeah, but so anyways, you've basically kind of laid this out as, if we don't throw money to Ukraine to keep Russia in check, we will end up having to offer men.
I think.
To this job.
I think so. Once again, which I should have specified earlier, we should. I think I was in favor of us helping Ukraine with monetarily. Now, there's a limit on that. I don't think we should just write them blank checks.
Yeah,
I think we've already done more than what we should have done.
Yeah.
But I do think it's in our interest. We have a vested interest in not letting Russia steamroll Ukraine in the same way that I don't think we should allow Russia steamroll anybody. Like I said, I don't care about Ukraine as far as a person from America. But, yeah, I think that Putin, your question was, is Putin as bad a guy as we think he is? I mean, it depends on how you define bad. I mean, I don't really care about him personally. I'm just talking about as an American, and the way I laid it out earlier. I don't think that we should allow them to do that because, like you just said, I think if we don't do something now or try to limit their ability to do what they want, which is to take over other nations, I think if we just stand idly by, then we'll have to pay an even heavier price later down the road.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that kind of wraps that question up pretty well. Yeah. I mean, he probably is about as deplorable as you can imagine.
He probably is, but like I said, him personally, I don't care either way about him. I mean, let him run his own country if he wants to do what he wants to do. But yeah.
Let's see if I got any other questions. Yeah, the whole "are you single" question, but apparently you're married to the U.S. of A.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Who asked that? Who wanted to know that question?
I can't tell you.
I hope it wasn't you.
Definitely not me. I know that. I know the answer for one. Oh man. Yeah. Let's see. I think that's kind of it.
Okay. Well, I've enjoyed it.
Yeah,
enjoyed the conversation, and I appreciate you allowing me to talk on your podcast.
Come on out anytime, buddy.
Yeah.
I mean, I had lots of fun. I didn't even get to write any notes down. Just dropped my paper.
Yeah.
Yeah. At some point, we'll have a better studio where this video won't just be like the sides of my head. Maybe we'll even have a button where when you're talking, I can hit it and you can.
There you go. Yeah.
It'll see your face.
You got to start somewhere.
We're starting. You can't let the great be the enemy of the good. So.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think.
And look, these faces weren't built for.
No.
For video, we're radio faces.
Yeah. Well, I think it's good that you got a podcast. I think ultimately anything that you do is probably similar to my thought process in life, which is for a purpose.
Yeah.
You wanna do something that you think will, if it even influences a good outcome for one person, it's a good thing to do.
Yeah.
So.
I do have one other question actually that I just remembered. All right. Sorry for all of these sounds, people. Well, are you a big Catholic? No, you're not a big Catholic. You're not even a little Catholic. Although what's funny is we line up on so many things, which can get kind of goofy. Like you had mentioned earlier, like there's so many people in our country that there's this fracturing where we don't have a common goal anymore. And to me, like within Christianity, like essentially so many things fractured off of Catholicism. You know, I think there's a lot of, like, the devil is definitely at work within the church, to where you have people who are like, look, this is not right, and rather than trying to correct it, we end up splintering off and starting new churches, which I don't think is right. Like, Jesus prayed that, you know, that all should be one, just as he and the Father are one. So I think there's something to be said for unity among Christians. But that's probably another podcast. We don't have time to go into that. But does being a historian reaffirm your faith, or does it pull away from it?
No. I think the more I know about history, which is really the more you know about human nature, the more and more it's apparent to me the truth of the Bible and God.
Yeah.
You know, so yeah, and I think that's applicable to anything if you're honest with yourself. I think the more and more, if you're someone that works in medicine, and the more you know about the biology or the anatomy of the human body, and I think if you're an engineer, the more you understand the physics of how things work, or if you're anything, I think it's, I think everything in life is a miracle.
Yeah. One last thing I want to hit before we wrap up. So I know a lot of people, and maybe I should have front-loaded this question, but there are so many people. You've worked at various, industries outside of healthcare, in the machinist world. Like, what does that work life look like?
As a machinist?
Yeah, because, like, as a nurse, I can do 3 12-hour shifts a week, and I'm done. Like, that's it.
Yeah.
Admittedly, that's 12-hour night shifts can be kind of rough on people, but there's a lot of nurses who I think are maybe disenfranchised and think that it would be better elsewhere. There are some, a shout out to Emily Wheeler. I'm for sure going to get her on the show. I don't know if she's listening. We'll see. But, she used to be a joke that she was an astronaut, but I think she was some kind of engineer. But she went back to school to become a nurse because, again, I'll save that story for when I can get her on the show, but we think so much of what our job is like, oh, this is so much work. Honestly, it's not that much. Like, we work 3 12s and we're gone. We're done. You don't have to pick up extra. Now, some hospitals require you to work extra. But, like, outside of nursing or outside of healthcare, what does the world look like?
Well, I mean, I'm not a nurse, so I don't know how demanding your job is. I assume it's pretty intense, I would assume. Just
sometimes.
Using common sense, I would think that, But anyway, yeah. I mean, there's different types of machining you can do. I mean, I've worked at 4 different machining companies now. I worked at one that was a company that made parts for the gas industry, natural gas industry, and that was interesting. I mean, that was engineer draws up a blueprint of a part that you need. He's got specifications, dimensions that are, to tight tolerances. I look at it, and I figure out how to make it. Then I've worked at another company that was for the Navy, and all that was pretty much done, and I had to just know the fundamentals of machining, so I would operate and make the part correctly, but I didn't really have to do any
But what about, like,
programming?
Not necessarily that, and, like, how work hours? Like,
it's normally, I've worked anywhere from 8 to 12 hours and 7 days a week sometimes.
So what's the longest stretch one you've ever done? Like, for any nurses out there who are like, I'm ready to get out of nursing and go do something else.
I've worked, which the companies that I worked at that were harder, I didn't have to work as many days, but still had to work. I'd say it's not unreasonable if you're a machinist. You're gonna have to probably work a lot of 6 day a weeks, 10-hour days. Sometimes 8 to 10 hours a day. Sometimes it varies, but yeah, if you're a machinist, if you're working as a machinist, you're gonna work overtime. It don't matter where you're at.
Yeah,
you're gonna work overtime. Yep, you're gonna work probably at least 50 hours a week, no matter where you go as a machinist.
So 50 hours a week in
and it could be any shift, first, second, third.
Industrial type jobs you're probably going to be working.
As a machinist, in my experience, and I think that's most people's experience as a machinist, you're going to have to work at least 50 hours a week, generally speaking.
Yeah.
Sometimes it might be 40, sometimes it might be 60, but I feel like, yeah.
I remember there are times where, you were like, yeah, I'm ready to be done. Like, because every now and then, like, all right, production's down, we got to, like, bump it up. And, you're working extra shifts on the weekends for, like, a couple weeks at a time or something. And you're like, well, someday I'll be off. And ultimately, that was why you quit working at that one job, because it was very often mandated overtime. Now, admittedly, you were compensated pretty well, but, at the end of the day, you're like, I need free time.
Well, if there's anybody that works at B&W or knows about the scheme that B&W has with the federal government, if Doge doesn't find out about you, I'm going to let them know about you.
Oh, man. That's a good spot to end, isn't it? Oh, man. Well, and just so you guys know, Jared's not he's not married to the United States. He is for sure single.
Or engaged.
He's not engaged either. He is definitely out on the prowl. So his number is 434. All right, man. Let's wrap it up. Thank you for coming out, bud.
Thanks, man.
Uh-huh.
I need to. You want to cut it?
Yeah. Until next time.